Good morning, everybody. I am Jack Bosley with the Digital Innovation Team, and I'm going to be moderating this morning's group of panelists. We've got several of my teammates and others that are monitoring the chat, so please make sure you pop in there and introduce yourself and let us know where you teach at, where you're at in JCPS or otherwise, and if you have any questions, make sure you put those in the chat as well. Thank you again for joining us in this second week of learning. And I see everybody is already in the chat. That's fantastic. I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter this morning. That's Cheryl Bibby, and she is going to be talking about passion projects. Cheryl, how are you this morning?
I am well. Hello, everyone. Let's get started. We're ready. So I am Cheryl Bibby, and I am the Deeper Learning Resource Teacher for Zone 3. So any of my Zone 3 peeps in the chat, shout me out. Be glad to come in and help you get started on this. I call this the quick guide to passion projects because it is 30 minutes, and I do want you to know there's much more to talk about with passion projects. So, like I said, I'm happy to come out and help, but this will be a quick guide, and we'll get straight to it. So, just so you know, when you're thinking about passion projects, it's just the best way to leverage the learner's curiosity. You're going to use standards and skills and competencies, and it can happen during NTI. And it's just an inquiry based learning experience for your students. They're going to research, they're going to create, and they're going to share. And what makes this so wonderful is that they get to show their voice and choice. This A lot of times people call it Genius Hour, so I still call it passion projects. You'll hear others call it inquiry projects, but the Genius Hour concept started with Google. Google gave their workers opportunity, like 20% time to work on their passion. And a lot of their products came from this time. So if you want to learn more about Genius Hour, I have a video here. We're not going to watch it now, but once this slide deck is yours, you're welcome to watch it. But one thing to remember, though, is that passion projects are for all students. There have been opportunities for, AP students and students who finish their work and, kids that are already on top of things. A lot of times people thought, oh, we'll give them a passion project. But passion projects are for all students. It is a great way for students to learn, and it does not have to be for your high flyers, as a lot of times you'll see. So please think equity here and give all your students an opportunity to have this kind of learning experience. Another thing to think about too is the difference between passion projects and project based learning. You'll hear them both, and hopefully, you're using them both. But passion projects are really based on the student's interest, it's all about their passion. Project based learning usually comes out in a question that the teacher poses to the students, and they work collaboratively with the teacher. But for passion projects, it's student directed, it's usually some independent work. It includes a reflection and the rubric. So there are some similarities, but the main thing to remember is that students get their choice of on their interest and their passion, whereas passion projects, I mean, where I'm sorry, where project based learning does not give that choice. Some of the benefits, really quickly, like I said, voice, choice. It encourages risk taking, authentic work. It explores students' interests, and it builds on those capacities and dispositions. If you're looking for a way to allow your students more voice and choice, passion projects would be it for you. So I'm going to take you through the steps. And with each step, I have a few links and things like that for you to see. But the first thing you want to start with is a launch. You don't want to go right into, okay, class, we're going to do passion projects. You want to find a way to launch the whole process. And there are lots of ways to do that, but that's the first thing I want you to think about. The next are the 6 steps are brainstorming, topic approval, research, product creation, presentation, and reflection. So we're going to run through those really quickly. So, first of all, like I said, project launch. You want to launch the project in some way. A lot of times people use videos. They may start with a book about, having an idea, what to do with an idea. With kids creating things, you may even look on YouTube and find kids who are talking about a passion project that they've done. This video, the 10 Young Black Entrepreneurs, shows kids who have turned their passion into a business. Kid President, everyone loves. It's a great video of him. And then think about yourself. I mean, that little bitmoji of me. What are my passions? Be able to share your passions with your students so that they can see this is something normal. Everybody has passions. Everybody has things that they like to do outside of school, and that may be the place to start for your kids. So next step is brainstorming. So you've launched it, kids know that something's coming. Now you want them to start brainstorming. What am I passionate about? What do I want to do? Once again, there are a lot of opportunities for that, but this goes right along with you building community. As you're building community and getting to know your students, why not ask them a few things? Why not ask them what they wonder about? What do they do outside of school? If you could do anything other than school, what would you do? Those kinds of questions will get them to wonder and start to think about what are my passions? Because you'll have a lot of kids that have no idea what they're passionate about. So I've put a video here for you that you can watch again on Geniushour. There are a lot of little templates that you can use to get kids to start thinking, what do you love? What do you like to do? Those kinds of things. I know Maddie, one of my coworkers, she has used the brackets just like you would use for basketball season. They start to put all the things they love and then they come down to one main item that's here. And then I just wanted to show you there are ways to use your Google Classroom, Jamboard, your slide deck, and I'll just show you a couple of those. Here's a Jamboard. That's just a wonder wall. It's exactly what you would have in your classroom, which I always had a wonder wall, just a space for kids to wonder. So they're just adding sticky notes to this wall and thinking about whatever they want to think about. I wish I could help my neighbor get groceries. And then I would respond to them on this little heart. And there we go. Where does coffee come from and why can't kids drink it or have it? So they're just putting anything that they wonder on this wonder wall. And eventually, these wonderings can turn into some kind of passion project or inquiry project. Another thing is using your Google Classroom. In my Google Classroom that I have all of, I think 3 students in my classroom, but I always have a virtual field trip because with a virtual field trip, kids can wonder. They're going to wonder. So this particular one is a virtual field trip of the Belle of Louisville. I have my wonder wall. They have their choice reading. I have the article of the day that they can wonder about. I always have an opportunity for them to wonder. Anything that they read, it's all here for them to wonder about. So with the virtual field trip, they would watch this video on the Belle of Louisville, and then they would go to the Wonder Wall and add to the Wonder Wall from there. So I just want to have, as many opportunities as possible for my kids to wonder and think and wish and look at the world so that they have something to think about later as far as what their passion project may be. So start that early, have that ongoing. There's also Wonderopolis, and that's linked here. You can take a look at that later. Let me get back to there we go. Yeah. Get rid of that. Okay. All right. So we've talked about brainstorming ideas, and now we're ready to talk about topic approval. This is not a free for all. Kids are not just set free to do whatever they want for this project. This is the process that kids have to go through before they can start on their project. And as far as topic approval, you're approving the topics. And some of the things they have to do, they have to create an inquiry question. They have to tell you the steps they're going to take to learn about this topic. They have to decide, how they're going to research and how they're going to demonstrate it. So, for example, if I tell you, I want to learn Japanese, or I want to learn a language and try it out for an entire day, then I've got to come up with an inquiry question about that. I have to come up with the steps I'm going to take to be able to learn Japanese. I'm going to have to do some research on what apps I'm going to use. And then I'm going to have to tell you how I'm going to demonstrate that. Maybe I'm going to have a video, or you're going to follow me around for a day and listen to me speak. So all of that has to be determined before students are set free to get going on their topic. They also need to, be able to pick a good question. Is it a Googleable question, or is it ungoogleable? You want the ungoogleable questions. You want students to go from what is a 3D printer to how can 3D printers benefit students in schools. So a lot of that takes time. This isn't a quick process. You want your kids to have a good question to start with so that they really have something to research. If it's a Googleable question, that stops the process there. That's a one day, go on Google and find the answer. So you want to really work with them on creating great inquiry questions. There are a lot of ways to approve the topic. There's templates out there. I think I have maybe something linked here. If it's not linked, it's at the end of the slide deck. But I would use a Google form. Have kids with their name, what their project title is, maybe their inquiry question, and then I would conference with those students to really pull out a better question or a bigger topic. Those kinds of things will help you to keep everything organized in your classroom as well. Next step is research. You want your students to have plenty of time for research. And during this time, note taking is happening. Your kids are blogging, they're reflecting along the way on the research they find. A lot of teachers would have them writing an informative or an explanatory piece or an argument at this time as they're collecting their research. At the end of their research, you may want a writing piece, and that's okay. That's okay to ask from every student that they either write an informative, an explanatory, or some kind of argument so that they can truly show that they understand their topic and the research that they've learned along the way. So, once again, yes, this is a passion project, but you, as a teacher, are allowed to ask for certain pieces and checkpoints along the way. And don't forget, you're still teaching. This isn't, like I said, not a free for all. You should be doing mini lessons along the way on note taking and how to research topics and choosing important details and unimportant. What's the difference? Writing those arguments and informative pieces. All of this you're doing along the way. These are mini lessons that will happen in your classroom. They're expected to happen in your classroom. So, once again, that topic approval and your mini lessons keep you in control of this time, and maybe having that Google form showing you what everybody's working on. Those are the things that you want to have going on in your classroom. Now, step 4 is creating a product, and they decide what product they're going to create. Like I said, if I'm the one learning Japanese, then maybe I'm going to do a quick iMovie, something like that, that is going to show, or, I'm videotaping myself speaking the language. If I'm working on, whatever my topic is, my passion is, the product that I create should show you to the best of my ability. So maybe I'm going to do artwork. Maybe I'm going to do a TED talk or a blog, or maybe I'm creating a slide deck or poem. There's lots of ways that kids can show what they've learned, but it should be up to them. You can give them some suggestions, like I'm giving you here, but the choice is theirs. You can, once again, a mini lesson on how you match your product to the work that you've done, and then you celebrate. You allow your students to show off what they've learned. These are all pictured here JCPS students, and they all had an opportunity to do passion projects. The kid in the right corner wanted to learn about wars. He was obsessed with all the wars. He wanted to learn about World War II, World War, every war he was impressed with. And he started a YouTube channel, and he was teaching other kids about all the different wars and what happened and what year they started. He had all the information there. This kid here in the left corner, was his passion was origami, and he created an origami city. He created origami. He learned about origami. He taught others about origami, and he placed little origami characters around his school because he said he thought origami made kids happy, and he wanted to see if it made kids happy. So once again, very different from one kid studying wars to the other kids studying origami. They were all learning to research and note take, and they all wrote their action plan that they were going to take on while they were learning. They all wrote an informative piece. So the work was still being done, but the topic was their choice. Let's see. So the other thing that I want to encourage you to do is allow your students to reflect on the process. This is going to help them with their backpack skills, and to help them to have that reflection already ready in their backpack. So, as they work at the end of the day, every day that they've worked on their passion project, have them reflect. Make sure that they're reflecting on the process, that they're thinking about what did I have to do today. Maybe they had some failures along the way, and they can talk about how they fixed it or who they worked with that increased their understanding of their topic. They maybe helped another kid, you know, get through some difficulties during this time. So it's always great to try to think about, okay, let them reflect. What was this process like? And what did you learn from it? And finally, you're thinking, okay, how will all this work with, lots of kids, and they're all working on different topics, and maybe you're just on Zoom and you're trying to get this done. Like I said, the first thing you want to do is start with getting to know your kids. Start with your kids answering questions about who they are, what they like, what they're doing, and keep those on those Jamboards. But then you want to conference with your students. You can do that through Zoom. You can conference with students who have similar topics, or you can conference one on one with your students about their passions. Then you could maybe group some kids together. Maybe that helps you to manage the process better. If kids have similar passions, you might put them together in a breakout room and let them talk about how they want to show what they know about this similar passion that they had. You can utilize protocols all day long. The tuning protocol is a great way. It's a great protocol for kids to learn, for one thing. And then they will be able to do some peer conferencing with the protocol, telling each other what they like, what they have, what they wonder about their passion project. Like I said, using Google Sheets to help manage the projects in the room. That's always helpful. Keeping the list of names, what project they're working on, and where they are in the process will help you to manage this. You could also have a space for dates when you're going to actually meet with that particular student, so that you have a calendar of dates that maybe you share with your students so they know exactly when you're going to meet with them. And sometimes, you may have to pick the topic, but you can allow for choice in what they want to know about that topic. I always had a student, who loved dinosaurs. to get him to focus, to get him to be with me in class, I would just put a dinosaur book on his desk. It made all the difference for the rest of the class, the rest of the day. So I didn't have to tell him what his passion project was going to be. The topic was picked. He knew he would do something on dinosaurs, but I still allowed for choice on what he wanted to tell us about dinosaurs. And you will have some kids like that where you might have to help them find that topic and then let them go with it as far as what they want to do and what they want to share. Um, Also, it's important for you to help your students set timelines and checkpoints. Once again, not a free for all, not expected to just say go for it and you never meet with those students again. There should be checkpoints and timelines that you look at when they do that topic approval. Set some timelines. Okay, Sam, I'm going to check back with you on Thursday to see how you're coming along with your research. And you're going to actually check with him. Make sure you set some checkpoints. By this time, everyone should be working on their informative piece. So you still set the goals, you still set those checkpoints. And your kids have to learn to be prepared and resilient during that time and keep up with all those timelines and checkpoints. Are there any questions or anything that I need to be aware of or no? We're good? Great. Mhm. Okay. Let me go back. I can actually show real quickly. This here was a first grade project, and I can't see the little girl holding the owls book. Each student chose an animal that they were passionate about. Once again, the teacher controlled what they were choosing from. And as you can see, she read books about owls. The teacher had set up research area that had only research about animals. She worked with the librarian on that, and the librarian helped her to just find great search engines for looking at animals for that age group. They did a word cloud or some other writing activity. They put the animal in their habitat. As you can see, she even created a little owl, stuffed owl. And they had a rubric that told them exactly what they needed to do. And they shared with each other. The picture you're seeing is this little girl telling me all that she knows about owls, where they live. And so that's one way. She controlled it by saying choose an animal, but the kids still had choice of what animal they chose and what they wanted to show and how they wanted to show it. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah. So this is another idea for some of the older kids. My coworker Joe McKim created this. It's adapted from geniushour.com, but it's actually a notebook, and I'll show you. It is, if a child wants to kind of work through this independently, you can kind of click on each little area. I'd have to put it in present mode, but I'm just going to show you each page. What is Genius Hour? The kid can, on their own, watch a Genius Hour video. It's going to go through the steps of planning out your project. Once again, this is that brainstorming page where kids can actually type in, have their own little presentation notebook. And it just kind of walks them through the process. What's a thick and thin question? Here, brainstorm your ideas, pitch your project. So all of that can be done by one student in this notebook. So you now have access to that as part of my slide deck. All right. And we are done. I put a few brainstorming sites here. I put a few other links here that I use when I'm planning. And there's a live binder. There's lots of good information here, just a few clicks away. And that's me, and I am done. How would I do on time? Right. Right. Mhm. Mhm. All right. Mhm. Joe made that little booklet, yeah. And if a kid, is moving ahead or needs that extra work, they can kind of slide through there and create their own project and go with it. So I'm real hopeful. I even like when projects turn into service learning. So a lot of times, a passion project can go into a service learning project. It can turn someone into an entrepreneur. I mean, it's a lot that can happen from passion projects. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Cheryl. Really appreciate you being on here. We'll see you next time, I guess.
Okay,
All
bye.
right.
Good morning, Jack.
Hey, how are you? I'm getting some messages from the team that they can't hear me, so I hope that's been corrected. I just clicked on a different button, so we'll see.
Did you unmute the OBS? I think that was the problem.
I did. So
Okay. It'll take a while to catch up.
okay. All right. Well, we'll see. Anyway, good morning again, everybody. I'm Jack Bosley with the Digital Innovation Team, and I am moderating this morning's sessions at least. And I'm going to be joined by two of my favorite people in JCPS, Jessica Cullen and Rebekah Reynolds. And they are going to be talking about virtual small group instruction. And I am going to turn it over to them in just a second. But before I do, just make sure you introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're at in JCPS. And with that, I will turn it over to you all. Rebekah, who's going to be driving?
I'm going to share my screen right now.
Okay, perfect.
All right, how are we looking? All right. All right, so I'm Rebekah Reynolds, and we've got Jessica Cullen here. I'm so excited she decided to join from Eisenhower Elementary. So now that I'm in zone one, her and I get to work together. So I'm super excited we get to do this little presentation together for you guys.
I'm so excited.
Okay, so we just curated some information and just some different tools and resources for you guys for small group instruction and just wrapping your head around that for NTI 2.0. So we're going to start with kind of setting up your groups. And we know that the first few weeks are really getting to know your students and building up those relationships. So this is something that you might want to press pause and save for later and watch in the next few weeks. So definitely keep this up. So I just kind of made this. This is kind of what I do. When students are coming in, we're obviously going to assess them, and that's going to look very different. Jessica and I even talked about how we love Jan, we get to see her later, but in the next steps in guided reading, there's a lot of one-on-one testing and kind of wrapping our head around what's that going to look like? How are we going to look at their finished work? So hopefully we can help you guys through that process. Analyzing that work, working in your PLC teams, creating those groups, and then obviously grouping those. So I like to keep it in those 3 steps. And then Jessica, did you want to talk a little bit about this reality that you're facing?
Sure. Yes. The reality of assessing all these students, in your classroom, it looks a lot different than it will be during NTI 2.0. It's really pertinent that we assess our students right away. And my PLC team and my staff have been talking about how to, wrap our head around this. So we have planned on using like a sign up Genius tool, so parents have the opportunity to sign up for a time that we can work one-on-one with our students and assess them. We've talked about teaching them how to use the take a photo tool. So if you're doing one of Jan's assessments where it's sight word or a word study, they can write down the words on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, whatever they have at their disposal, and take a photo with that. And then you can screenshot that, or you have that photo later on to look for misspellings and mistakes and kind of see your next steps and to drive your instruction. And of course, using the Google Meet code, share that, maybe keep it the same, try to keep a schedule. It's very important to be consistent with your schedules with your students and get that assessment going at the beginning of the year so you can actually form those groups.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so for meeting with groups, we kind of discussed that there's kind of only really two options. Unless if you guys think of more, definitely let us know. We're always open for working with new ideas. So meeting live with a group, obviously on Google Meet. So bringing in those few students in that math, reading, science, whatever group you're working on, and working with them live. Hopefully everyone would be on time, and you'd be doing maybe breakout rooms or something like that. And then the other option that could work for students with busy parents, they're busy, they've got lots of siblings, is working in a pre-recorded group so that they can access that whenever they want. And I know Jessica worked with that in the spring, which was really cool.
Yeah, we did a lot of pre-recorded in the spring because we had, schedules were crazy, and I anticipate that for NTI. So we will get to that in a minute.
And then if you missed out last week on when I presented on breakout rooms, I just wanted to touch this for like a second for you guys. If you are meeting with small groups and you want other small groups to be meeting at the same time, you can definitely check out these slides, and each room is actually linked at the top up here. Students can click that and go into their room. While you're in there, obviously teacher always get into that Google Meet first, and you can just have access to this slide and this slide deck, because I know it's a lot of resources coming at you at once, so that way it keeps coming at you. And then obviously when you are using Google Breakouts, if you're using that for your small groups, the awesome extension you can grab is Mute Tab. That's free, and it's linked when you click on the picture in this slide deck, and that will be linked later today, or hopefully now. I just shared it, and it will have that M for mute, and that way you don't have a bunch of small groups talking very loudly at the same time. And then here is one option you can use to break out each of those meets and look into the groups while they are muted. I like to make those screens small, and I'll just click on that idea that we had to bring your groups together. So whatever groups they are, you're obviously going to group your students. Giving everything in one spot, I think, is super important, especially for our littles. And then having that schedule for times, and then using that same Meet link for your Google Classroom. That way they're not all in.
To use that same Meet code every week, and to also kind of try to make the schedule the same. I name my groups this NTI 2.0. I would love to use it in my group and even make a breakout room for each student. So that student could be in there, whisper reading their book and not worrying about talking over other people. I think that would be a great way for you to jump into that room, listen to that student reading, kind of take your notes and a little running record over what that student's reading, and then jumping into the other rooms.
Yeah, I really like how you have your group schedule set up. Perfect students can see what time they're supposed to be at. And then do you use the little video camera live for the link?
Yes, you definitely can do that. To click that, just to go straight to Google Meet, and you can give your Meet code on there, which can be the same thing every time. It could just be like group Kiwis or whatever you would like to do, and that way the students are familiar and doing this the same every day, every week, or however you're managing to meet with these groups.
I love that. Okay, so math groups.
I put this on here. This is just kind of my math manipulatives page, because I know that when you're meeting with math groups and you're working in math, you use a lot of manipulatives. I'm not quite positive what your students will have at home, what you're being able to send home. The Toy Theater is a great website with digital counters, digital manipulatives. So I have that accessible for my students that don't have that at home. They have a ton of they even have some reading ones too. So it's a great place to go and link some tools for your students to use. Of course, they can use, cereal, pennies, toys, if anything to use for counters. But this is just another virtual way to use that and to pull that into your group.
I love this. I could sit here and click all these all day. This is super great for kids. What do you have linked down here?
That's just a counting video. Jack Hartman, I'll put different videos. Sometimes I might put them with my little frames up there, and different videos they can listen to, some things to do on their own, or maybe while I'm finishing up another group, they could, explore this page while they're waiting to meet with me.
That's perfect. This is great.
Jamboard. I used Jamboard a lot last year in the spring, and I'm excited to use it even more this year in class and virtually. Some different Jamboards I've made. This was just a Make It Monday. Obviously, you can see this. Think of an equation that would equal 61. And so I took this idea from another JCPS teacher where she had all her Post-it notes numbered with her kids' numbers, 1 through 26 or whatever amount of kids you have. And they would just take a Post-it note and type their answer on it and place it on their number. So I could see quickly who responded, who hasn't, and then see what they come up with. This was something you can do in math groups, math talks. This was one of our math talks, but math groups definitely, you're working together on this. All the students had access to this at the same time. And this was great for quick assessment, quick to see what they're working on and how they're doing things.
Yeah, I really like looking at this, like the kid who just put 60 plus 1. I mean, yeah. You could think a little more complicated, but just wrapping their head around their thinking. I love Jamboard for this.
Mm-hmm. And you can do some great discussions with it.
That would be perfect for a warm-up too. Let me get back. All right, so my favorite guided reading groups, and you guys have to stay on the channel later today for Jan Richardson. We're really excited. So we didn't include too much guided reading because we knew you guys would get a lot later.
Yes, and like we talked about before, I had to do a lot of pre-recorded guided reading lessons. I'm hoping I can do more live this go around. But when I did it, I used a lot of slides and Jamboard. These are some slides I did with my students. They would do it on their own and send it back to me. Schedules just didn't work out last spring with a lot of live instruction. So these were just little Jan type tools that I used: an analogy chart, sound boxes, making big words, sight word review. They would watch a video, listen to myself saying the words, and they would write it on a whiteboard, take a picture, place it onto the slide. I would have the letters provided for the making big words. I would record myself just saying the big word. They would make it. Same with the sound boxes. You can see the little audio button. I used a lot of the audio tool for slides, and I'm so glad that is available. These are just screenshots, so they're not live links. But these are my kids' work from the spring: analogy chart, and then they had to highlight their the chunk we were talking about. And it was easy just to see quickly what they're doing. I had a video before this that they watched me model it. That's going to be a lot of modeling with this virtual teaching. And I think this is a great way to be able to see what kids are doing if they're not able to meet with you live.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to be flexible as we start and have a lot of different options for yourself and for the kiddos. So this is really great. So managing your small groups. We talked about this. Well, I talked about this last week. If you're doing a small group that is not teacher-led, but you obviously want to be in there in the Google Meet first, here are some really great roles for the students to have. Just since student roles in groups in the classroom setting are pretty similar, but these could be useful if you are going virtual. The one thing that I'd say really changed would be material manager is now managing materials that could be websites, materials you've sent out in Google Classroom, giving that to someone who's techie that maybe possibly if a student doesn't know where something is, they could share their screen and kind of walk them through, do the teacher's job for you, just so you're not overwhelmed with a lot of questions. I think that's going to be super important going forward in NTI. So questioner, timekeeper, I know that's hard. We've got our timekeeper right now, Jack, in the background. Reporter, that's someone who would come back if you guys all come back to the same Google Meet and report out what's going on, what happened in the group, what did you guys discuss? And then that encourager. I kind of put that as like a leader, but when you say someone is a leader, they can tend to get a little bossy. So just calling them the encourager to keep all the group together and doing what they're supposed to do. And then I just had this graphic so that you could assign the kids that, or they could go in and write their names if you share this with them, just to have another graphic for you guys. And I think that was it. Is there anything that we're missing, Jessica? We always go so fast. We still have
we can talk about how we need to so that we don't go too long. I think just to reiterate that the first couple weeks, just like you would in any school year, you're just building that relationship and that community. So put a pause on this. This will be recorded. You will be able to come back to this in when you need it. I know that wrapping my brain around small group instruction virtually has been hard. And so I had to just kind of take a step back and think, okay, my first couple of weeks, I'm just going to get to know my students. I teach first grade. So building that community and then teaching them how to use these tools is going to be in the forefront to do that. Teaching them how to take a picture of their work, teaching them how to use Google Meet, just kind of, and then assessing them. So I'll roll this stuff out in a couple of weeks. But first, just make sure that you build those communities and assess your students. And that way you can work out the kinks with the meets and virtual learning and then start working on these small groups.
So one thing that I think we would love to see, if you don't feel too much pressure, is how you add in sound to your slides. If you want to share your screen and just pop open one of those slides and kind of show us how that works.
Sure.
We have the time. I know that's something that I was like, oh, I want to click on it and see what you say.
Yeah. While I'm looking for it, I can tell you, I use Screencastify a lot for audio. Mm-hmm. You can just download your audio through Screencastify, not just the video. And also a tool online, I think it's onlinevoicerecorder.com.
Yes.
Online voice recorder. I use that a lot when I'm just doing like a simple, like a sentence or a word, and it saves right to your hard drive, and you can pull that onto your slides really quickly. And I'm trying to
No pressure. Don't feel pressure.
No, that's okay. Oh,
She's never going to be on the show again when I throw stuff at her.
No, it doesn't matter. I'm fine. Let's see. Yes. Oh, definitely. Oh, yes. I can share that somehow. Yeah, please don't have me do it right now.
We'll link
Yeah, no, that's
we
fine.
promise. I think that the
I
Jamboard
am
is
gonna.
linked in there right now. You guys should be able to just make a copy of that. That's live.
Yes, and I can share. Um, I just made screenshots of my pre-recorded stuff, so I didn't have so many slides. But I can open up one of my old.
Look how much fun stuff she has.
I know it's a lot. Here's an example. I think. So you can see in my title that I use like Wednesday and Thursday guided reading, lesson 2, group 2. This was before. Like I said, I would just pull in audio, insert audio was a lifesaver when Google rolled this out, and it goes into your drive, or you can find things from your whatever you did recently. So there's my recent drive. That's easy. You just drag it in there and it puts this little audio picture. You can also, if you are in the Bitmoji train, you can also make your Bitmoji say the audio or speak the audio if that's what you would like to do. Then I just put videos of me with a sight word review. Like I said, a lot of modeling happened. Here was a breaking apart words, or the breaking words that Jan Richardson does. I would just say the word. Not that you really want to hear that. Okay, now I want you to give it a try. I've put a word on your screen and I want you to take those lines, drag those lines to break up this word. Show me the 3 parts of this word. Then I want you to read the word. Once you've read the word, I want you to read it to an adult or someone older than you that knows what the word is to make sure you're correct. I start talking too much when I do audio, usually talking to my kids. But that was just a simple way to see them to, and this was assigned in Google Classroom. So, of course, it had their name and I knew whose it was. They turned it in as an assignment and I could assess their right there. Now, if we could, I don't know how to assess them with reading it. I had to trust that maybe they're reading it to an adult, and that's just something that you just have to take hit or miss. And then maybe when you do a live group, you could have them go ahead and tell you about how they divided this up. You could do this in your Meets Live where they have this, and they could share their screen and do that. Everyone could be doing it at the same time. Then someone could share their screen. Again, you could use those breakouts where they're doing it in the breakout rooms, and you can pop in and kind of see what their work is like.
I think that adding in that audio piece is super great. I did it for a lot of my summer league presentations, and so many of the parents were so thankful because a lot of times with so many Google slides, you're popping through all of these and they don't really know what to do. And like having written instructions is tedious. It's really nice to be able to listen to your teacher's voice and be there with them. So thanks for showing us that. That's perfect.
And kind of going with that, I know with primary students, unfortunately, it's going to put a lot of pressure on parents and older siblings, older adults that are in the house to help. I know that on my Google site, that's kind of my home base for my students this year. I'm making a lot of how-to videos for basically the parents. And I would love the kids to watch it too, but just so the parents understand how to connect to a Google Meet, how to mute, how to do, Google Classroom and turn in assignments. I think, pulling the parents into that, it will relieve some stress that they have. And I found that in the spring that me talking to my parents a lot and teaching them that helps a lot with these primary babies to get their work done.
Yeah, I think Bryan is up next, and he has some really great ideas on how to make some really fun videos. So I'm excited.
Yeah, he always has some great ideas to pull in that fun piece.
Well, Jack, I know we've got 10 minutes of airtime, but that's probably good for the video being short for later watching, but I don't want you to just be...
that I have to talk indefinitely, for 9 minutes straight. I'll remember this, you two. Just
I anyone want us to do anything else? I don't. We have
Other questions in the chat?
There's not, just they were mostly interested in those resources that you guys are going to link in later, or maybe you already did. We again appreciate both of you being on here. You two are awesome. The one thing that I was wondering, I mean, obviously lots of great resources, but you two became famous in JCPS initially for your KCAN2, and obviously this material is perfect for that. Do you have any tips or tricks that you want to share with the group about, in NTI at least, getting those younger kids started on devices at home and that sort of thing?
I know definitely pulling in the parents and kind of talking with them. I had a Google Meet with my parents, just one on with only parents, just to kind of talk them through and troubleshoot anything they were worried about after our first week of NTI in the spring, so they could bring up questions and concerns. And I really do think taking that extra time to create screencastifies how to use the tools exactly. I tend to use my children's login, so it's a student view, and that really helps. So I know because the teacher view and student view is a little bit different with like Google Classroom and things. So to see from the student side and kind of walk them through it, you can type out the directions and put some pictures in, but I feel like those videos really help parents and the students. They can go back and watch it, and then also just let them try it. You'll be surprised how techie the little kids are. Even kindergarten, I know my 2-year-old can get onto YouTube on my phone or something and search. She knows how to press the search button and speak to what she's looking for. And so they're more techie than probably we are and that we anticipate. So just to kind of give it a try and just do it.
Hey, Jack, I was going to mention as well, we had some questions in there about the breakout rooms, and I wanted to kind of give Rebekah a quick plug as well for again tomorrow, I believe. So I think she's on the schedule again. So check that out. If not, check out the digital learning channel, guys. And her slide is linked from last week as well. So
Yeah.
just want to make sure we're pointing that out.
Yep. Great point, Kyle. Appreciate that. I'm going to, Jessica, thanks again. I don't want to make you fill airtime if you don't want to. So we really appreciate you always being here and contributing. Your perspective on KCAN2 is invaluable to this district, and you and Rebekah just provide insights all the time for that particular group. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Jessica.
So I'm Jack Bosley, and I'm glad one of my teammates is on here, Kyle Chandler. And hey, good morning, sir. I'm going to take a minute and see if I can pull up the schedule here to show everybody. Now, you can get to today's schedule by going to jcps.me/NTI. And you can click on the teacher side of that, and it will show you the schedule for the rest of the week. And here in just a few minutes at 9:30, we are going to have Bryan Morrison from Medora Elementary, and he's going to be talking about student engagement in virtual learning environments. And you can also see the rest of the schedule. It's like my boss, Heather Worrell, custom made this schedule for me because Ryan knew, and Vincent Tinker, the guys from social studies, are going to be on here, and Rebekah and Jessica were on here. So just a great lineup this morning. At 10:30, Lacey Eccles and Charlotte Ivy are going to be talking about norms in the science classroom during NTI. And then Maddie Shepard back again with Christy Mudd, and they're going to be talking about PBL during the NTI elementary groups. And then to finish it out, at least for the morning session, it's going to be PBL during NTI middle school. So that's what everything looks like.
Jack,
Yes.
Hi, good
Morning.
morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I think Bryan is here, and
Okay.
I wanted to just point out that Bryan had quite the following on Twitter with some of the really engaging stuff that he was doing, and some of us saw it and thought we need to get him on an episode because nothing is better than our expert teachers coming on and sharing what this really looks like with NTI 2.0. So Bryan is ready. Bryan, are you down there?
Bryan
I think
popped
I
in. Yeah,
can.
there he is.
All right, he might be ready to rock, Jack.
Yeah, Bryan, do you want an extra few minutes? Would that be helpful?
Hey, sure. I'll try this.
All right.
All right, while Brian's getting set up, big shout out to Medora Magics. I've got a first grader out there, and Principal Palmer and that crew are just on it. So you guys are all lucky to be together, and I'm super lucky as a parent with a kid over here. So thanks for being with us, Brian, and doing what you're doing for the kids.
Thank you.
Bryan, you're looking good.
Awesome. I practiced last night.
All right, perfect. Well, again, I'm Jack Bosley with the Digital Innovation Team, and Bryan Morrison from Medora Elementary is going to be joining us. Be sure to pop into the chat, let us know who you are, where you teach, and if you have any questions. And with that, Bryan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I know my inspiration is Matt and Kyle from Kentucky Go Digital. They just brought so much passion. I was like, oh my gosh, they are my spirit teachers. So I love being able to work with them. So student engagement. So some stuff about myself. My name is Bryan Morrison. I am married to Tiffany Morrison. She's a gifted teacher in JCPS. We have a daughter, Peyton. She's a second grader at Eisenhower. Eisenhower's doing great things too. I just watched Miss Cullen. If you did not watch her, definitely go check her out. Some things about me. I love talking math, and I love having kids talk about math. And I know during NTI, it's difficult to have kids talk about math. So that's something I still think about every day is if they're not in a small group, how are they going to talk about math? And that's something I'm still trying to wrap around because I know we lost a couple of resources because of permissions and stuff, but we'll get through that. Some stuff about me is I went to U of L. I got my bachelor's of science in education. I'm a huge Cubs fan. I am a fifth grade teacher at Medora. And one big important thing about my classroom is the class rug. Having that no barrier zone where kids are equal to the teacher is crucial to building relationships and for them even caring about what I say. Without that rug, we're just all separated by tables, desk. I love the rug. And basically our little morning meetings that we're going to do during NTI 2.0 is going to be like our rug time. So any questions about that? All right. So my mindset is this time, Miss Monet does a really good job. She says, we can change the world. And then Steve Jobs at the bottom says, think different. We're making history, as Denise Gibbons says 20 times in every presentation, is we're making history right now. So how are we changing the world for the better? Rita Pearson, amazing. If you've never watched her TED Talk, kids aren't going to listen to anyone that they don't like. So we have to spend, like Ms. Cullen said, the first couple of weeks just building those relationships. Do fun, engaging activities. I'm going to give some ideals, but guess what? If you don't make them feel wanted, they're not going to come to our Google Meets. So spend some time in those first couple of weeks, build those relationships. They're crucial. And then the great Maya Angelou, again, they're going to forget some of the stuff we did, but they're never going to forget how we made them feel during this time. So social emotional learning is crucial. And I know some upcoming sessions are going to be about building relationships virtually. So can't wait to watch those. All right, so a couple things about me is I love to build relationships with kids. First thing is once I got my class list, I'm starting to think about who I'm calling first. Make those phone calls. They're free to do. Send a postcard. I'm going to show you an example later on about a postcard that I'm sending out to all my kids. It's from the Facebook group Bitmoji Craze for Educators. And it's a Where's Mr. Morrison postcard. And I was like, that is super cool. I didn't have to create it. I just had to draw my Bitmoji on it. Shout out boards are something I like to do, especially if you saw Miss Cullen's Jamboards where she made numbers. I would take one of those kids and say, wow, that is an amazing thing. It just makes kids feel like you appreciate their thought. If you have not made a Bitmoji classroom, I know there's sessions on that. Kids love Bitmojis because they can click on the interactive links and they get to learn more about you. if you have never gave personalized feedback using Screencastify, I highly recommend it. Kids love seeing your face when you're talking to them. It's like being in a one-on-one meeting, and they can see your face. The one thing I worry about is if we give them too many Google Forms. A Google form, I feel that we may be going to is just another worksheet. That's just my personal preference. Like, if we can alternate between a form and a slide, that'd be amazing. But that's just me. All right. So a couple things I did last year to build these personalized experiences is Flat Morrison. He has his own Instagram account. And what I did is I sent myself to a bunch of kids, like a Flat Stanley. And then they would send me a picture, and then I just give them a shout out on Instagram. The kids loved it. On this one, a girl made frozen dog trees, and she's like, "Hey, Miss Morrison, can you give me a shout out?" I'm like, "Yeah, definitely." Another thing, instead of doing that Google form on getting to know your kids, I have a great team member, Ashley. She was like, "Bryan, I have this agree or disagree for math." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I can look at how you're thinking." And then when I pull a small group, I say, "Hey, so you believe you're a good math student. Why do you think that?" And just work and have those conversations, but actually paying attention. Don't just use it as a time killer. Actually use that feedback and instruct your teaching. I have an amazing PLN, Crystal. She was like, "Bryan, would you want to do a hydro flask with your kids to get to know them?" I'm like, "Heck yeah." So this is a great Google Slides presentation. Basically, they already have the stickers, so the kids just decorate their hydro flask using stickers already made for them. So that's another way that kids can show you what they're like, and you can learn about them. I know one of the greatest things about NTI is I have not heard a hydro flask hit the ground in over 160 days, and that makes me super excited. Virtual cubbies is kind of like a virtual classroom. If you have advanced kids, they might be able to make one themselves, but it's just the same thing as like an About Me bag. I love to make About Me stuff, so that's my virtual cubby that I made. Again, go Cubbies, and yep. So one big thing is always try to mix up your experiences for your kids. I'm pretty sure Maddie Shepard did a session on the SAMR model. SAMR has been a game changer for me. My old principal, Mr. Russell, loved to tell us that a worksheet is still just a worksheet if it's just digitally made. So making it a little more difficult is what engages my kids. So make them create something automatically is going to be like, wow. If they send it to somebody, that improves it even more. So if you have not ever learned about the SAMR model, you can take one thing, make it so much more difficult. And I know our choice board, the JCPS choice board, has a lot of good things. And in your choice boards, definitely listen to their interests. Last year I had a kid that hated math, but he looked at the 3-point shooting for the NBA and learned how to compare decimals that way. And he did amazing. He grew like 20 points on the math test. So just finding their interest, find things that will engage them is super important, especially during NTI and distance learning.
Bryan, you're hitting on all cylinders here. It's we need to get you on our team showing the SAMR model, and that is like our mantra around on our team is student creation, student creation, student creation. So
thank you. So a couple of things about me is I love to use green screen. It is very difficult for kids to use green screen because what I use an app called Do Ink. It's a $5 app on my phone. And basically, I have a green bed sheet that I bought on Amazon, and I have green sheets once a month. But it literally sets the stage. So we're about to start volume in math. I'm going to put myself in a green screen fish tank, hold up little cubes, and hey, if this fish tank is 3 feet by 2 feet by 4 feet, how many of these little 1-foot cubes can I hold up? So kids are like super engaged because they're like, wow, Mr. Morrison is literally in a fish tank. One of my intro videos, I dressed up as Darth Vader. Again, every kid loves it. No kids ever like, oh, Mr. Morrison, we hate your green screen. Last year, when we did the American Revolution, we went to State Street, and the kids made little presentations on construction paper and little clip art people. And they just had to retell what they believed happened during the Boston Massacre. They reenacted it with little clip art people. and we just put it on a green construction paper and use green popsicle sticks, and they move their people and talk. It was super cute. One of my favorite lessons every year is designing a classroom. I know Ms. Barker and Fink, they design a classroom. I design a classroom using decimals. They have to basically build a classroom using Target, Walmart, Home Depot, and design a classroom for one of 4 scenarios. It's the easiest way to teach them decimals. Well, the funniest thing is when you take a picture of the classroom, you can put yourself in their classroom or in their room or whatever. So I put myself in the chair, and I just made a little video of myself waving on the rocking chair. The kids died laughing. Again, we are not at a beach because some people don't believe we should be traveling during this time, which I highly agree. But guess what? I had a video from spring break 2 years ago. That was my backdrop for my introduction video. So kids loved it. And you're like, Mr. Morrison, this is way too hard to do. I am not very good at technology. Do Ink is probably one of the simplest apps to use. Basically, I took a picture of my Google Classroom and I recorded a video of myself in front of it, and I just put them on top of each other, and it automatically takes out the green, and I have my video. It's super easy, and then I just export it, and it's automatically saved onto my phone. It is one of the most simplest apps I've ever used, and there's more things you can do. If you don't have a green screen, you just have a blue sheet. They can do a blue sheet too. Red, they have a red color too. Yellow normally makes you invisible, so I would stick to the blue and green, maybe red. iMovie, if you're like Mr. Morrison, I do not want to spend any money. And I was like, hey, $5, that's literally a Starbucks cup. I drank some K-Cup that Tiffany had, and I was like, hey, I saved $5. I can afford my app one time. iMovie also has it. It is not as easy. There's probably a great YouTube video series that you can watch, but it's the same thing. Is you just record a video, have a green screen, and it takes out the green, but it has a lot less options than the Do Ink app. And again, the Do Ink just helps me make a simple video really quick, and it literally hooks the kids, and they're like, wow, something's wrong with Mr. Morrison. But they love it. I hope they do. At least they tell me they do. All right, what's up next? All right, so this is one of the hardest things I know when we started thinking about FERPA and PII, because again, I used everything in the world to try to assess kids. I used Flipgrid, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, now we can't use that. So what am I going to do to assess my kids in a fun and engaging way? That's not just a Google sheet. It's not just a Google slide. It's not a Google form. It's something fun. Kahoot still, I believe, is approved. I hope it is, and it's not disappeared. But Kahoot is just a quick thing you can do in a Google Meet. It's a quick game. Tiffany was like, Bryan, you need to get on Nearpod. I was like, well, and one day I learned how to be a distant learning expert. I'm not an expert. I just know how to use Nearpod a little bit better than I did before. But they have a badge system. They have a great YouTube series. I am probably going to use the Nearpod a lot more. They have a free version and a paid version. Right now, I'm just using the free version. Peyton last year used Boom cards. I've never actually used Boom cards, but I saw that they were approved. So she kind of liked them. So we'll see how that goes. Again, what's going to happen? I don't know. All right, so I want you guys to think differently, because I love to think outside the box and change. How can we change the game? Because this is a time where we're not going to have worksheets to go to the teacher's lounge and copy. So let's think differently. So one of these equations came from a second grade assignment. So solve for E in the equation. E equals F plus 2B if 2B equals 8, B plus D equals 11, or F minus D equals 3. And you're like, what, Bryan? Second grade cannot do that. And I bet you we can, because here we go. Because I was like, Peyton, what do you think the answer is going to be? So there is an amazing website that uses these, and this is how I do my number talks during NTI 1. I probably do NTI 2.0, but it's solvemoji.com, and it literally can give you a picture, and it's like bunny plus bunny equals 8. So you're like, I wonder what bunny is. If bunny has to be the same thing, it's 4. And I don't know about you, sometimes in math, the only reason why I'm teaching it is to solve Facebook memes that people post out, because order of operations, I have yet to have someone walk up to me in Kroger's and say, Bryan, what's 2 times 3 plus 4? No one ever does that. But they will ask you on Facebook to solve a Facebook meme. Higher math, you probably need order of operations, but in my belief, 5th grade has never needed it, but they love to solve this. And if you're still thinking, the answer is 18, because 2 bunnies equals 4 and the frog equals 10. But again, think about that. Second graders can do this, and they have easier and they have a whole lot harder. And again, how can we engage our families? Drop one of these, ask parents to try to solve it. They loved it. Another thing I love to do is make interactive slides. OPA is a made-up name. We have that book when we had Peyton 8 years ago, in 10,000 different names. So I just put a random name because everyone knows when we take standardized tests that they have some of the most unique names in the world that always trip up our kids. So what I do is, that's how I make my story problems, is I pick a name out of the 10,000 names, and that's what pops up. So if your name's Oprah, welcome to my class. But in this example is kids actually have to spend, and what they do is making change. And you're like, Bryan, that seems super easy. I'm guaranteeing that if I put this in a Google form, every kid in my class would put $3.60 or 67 cents as the change, because they don't know how to subtract decimals. But moving these interactive money, they can move the $1 each time, and the dollars will actually move. And if you save the background as a picture, they're always there. And normally I'll put like 5 or 10 or 15 $1 bills in each of the coins, so they literally can just move the money over. And that's how they make change. And then they put their answer in the green box. It's super easy to grade. It's so much more interactive than a Google form. And that's just a personal preference. That Bitmoji group on Facebook, people have created Google Docs with tons of different Bitmojis. So again, using diversity in your problem. So use females, use males, use kids, use whatever you want, but don't just put yourself every single time. Because again, nobody wants to see your Bitmoji. People like to see other people. And again, my name's not Oprah, and I'm not buying a trampoline for $42.67. All right, so one of the things that is controversial is social media. I love social media because I utilize it when I app smash. And you're like, what's app smashing? Basically, it's taking highlights of certain apps and using it for different things. So, for example, Snapchat. If you have never downloaded Snapchat, I love to use Snapchat filters. There's a one where you can make yourself a baby. Guess what? Make an introduction video of yourself as a baby. Every kid is listening to you for that 8 minutes. Or please don't make an 8-minute video. That 30-second snippet, 1-minute snippet. But they're super engaged because they're like, wow, Mr. Morrison has a baby. This is hilarious. If you've never seen what a book snap is, basically, I read a lot of my books digitally. You screenshot it, put your Bitmoji, and it's like, wow, look at this sentence. So it's just highlighting a part of a book. And then you can make your Bitmoji dance on Snapchat, save that video, put it in your Google Classroom, and then you have a dancing video. Super cool. Then the Bitmoji social media. If you do not have an interactive classroom, I know Miss Colin has one of the best interactive classrooms. Toy theater, like she was saying, is something I use almost every day. It's a great way to use math manipulatives, and it adds flair to your presentations. I dislike, more than anything, just a white and black Google slide presentation, because it's like an old PowerPoint in a business meeting. Nobody wants to watch that, especially kids. They want to see some happiness. And you're like, Bryan, you saying TikTok? Well, right now we still can TikTok, and we don't know how long that's going to be, but they have some great filters that you can use too, that you can edit videos. Kids are on Snap or TikTok. They shouldn't be, but that's a whole different issue. But I love just dance, make a silly video like, hey guys, join the Google Meet. We're going to have a dance party today. I made that on TikTok. That's probably my most attended Google Meet session last time. And here's my postcard that I'm sending to all my kids. It's where's Mr. Morrison? So people have already created these templates for you, and then you just find yourself or put your Bitmoji in, send that to kids. They absolutely love looking for you. And here I am right here if you were looking for me. And if I just spoiled that, I'm so sorry. So in conclusion, this is a magical year. We've never had an NTI 2.0. We've never had a virus that took us out of school this long. But let's make magic. Let's change the game. It's our time to change the way we think. Again, flipped classrooms are something I've been doing all last year and the year before, and that's helped me transition to this NTI. So if you're like, if there's one thing you learned about NTI is the flipped classroom design, that's super important. But again, if you ever want to follow anything I'm doing on Twitter, I'm at Morson's Class. And if you want to follow Morson's journey this year, I'm on Instagram at Flat Morson. And always use the hashtag JCPS Dig In, because we have a lot of creative teachers in JCPS that like to shout out using that. And that's where I get a lot of my stuff. That's how I found Miss Colin. Again, she's a superstar. So I believe that is it. If anyone has anything. All right, let's see.
Bryan,
Yes, ma'am.
you did an awesome job. You're getting a lot of love in the chat. Spectacular as always. I think Jack's going to pull up your green screen video where you're talking about the tour of your Google Classroom. Awesome.
All right, let's see if it plays.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mr. Morrison, and I am your teacher this year, and I am ready to take you on a tour of your Google Classroom. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
So again, this video only took 10 seconds to make. Once our classrooms get auto-populated, I'll probably actually walk through. But just harnessing my Matt and Kyle is, you're a salesman. We're in art. We have to engage our kids. Our kids watch 15-second TikTok videos. So how are we going to engage our kids is how that was my motivation behind that video. So.
Well, Bryan, we're flattered. I must say that Matt was my inspiration. So it's funny how that works out. And I'll tell you that I'm in full agreement, man. I remember, now it's been a bit since I was in the lab setting, but thinking about how I had to compete with cat videos on YouTube. So yeah, with the advent of TikTok and other mediums, I'm with you on that. And I think you're right, man. If you can't keep the kiddos engaged, what are we doing? How are they going to learn? And you're doing a great job of that using these digital tools and resources. So again, man, thanks for being here. And thank you for all the love. If you guys missed the Kentucky Go Digital event Bryan's referencing, me and Matt were just a couple of hands, but there was really good content. So you can check that out. What they recorded and uploaded it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love how you said, and now, Bryan, how many years in JCPS have you been with us now?
This is my 15th year.
15th year. That's awesome. So again, much inspiration. I heard you mention earlier, you said something about there. You said, well, I'm not really good with technology. And, sometimes we hear that when we're out, and it's great that you're still out there pushing and helping to grow that, especially during NTI, right? Everybody's getting good at it, aren't they?
Oh, definitely. That is correct. I literally just got two push pins, stuck it on the wall, and 10 seconds I had a video. So just dropping them. It's really super simple. It's a great app.
Question, what kind of device? Yeah.
Basically, I have an iPhone, but you can do it on an iPad, but I just do it on my phone because it's a lot more portable than my iPad. So, but yeah, and then they're just automatically saved onto your phone.
Jack, we can't hear you on the channel side.
it gets echoey when I do that. So sorry, but that's just we'll just have to deal with a little echo for a few minutes. But thank you, Heather, for telling me that. But what I was saying is it just amazes me the quality that you're getting out of using something like Do Ink and your phone and how easy that is. And everybody's got a smartphone. So there's no limit there or no reason that you can't be doing that.
No. $5 is a Starbucks cup of coffee. So go one day without my Starbucks, just use a K-cup, and it's a great trade-off. One-time fee, $5.
Absolutely, man. And you said, is it all one word, D-O-I-N-K, or?
Yes, it's D-O-I-N-K, and it's like a green octopus.
Okay.
So, or it's a pink octopus with a green background. But it's a great app to use. And they have a great Twitter following. So if you follow them on Twitter, there's so many people that have used it. And that's where I get some of my inspiration.
So, Bryan, one of the things that somebody brought up in the chat was, and I'm just going to make an assumption here, but they said they really love all this, but it seems very time consuming. Do you have any, can you give people an idea, like you made that 10 seconds or whatever. How are you balancing all of your creativity with other duties like grading things and attendance and just the, day in and day out stuff of teaching?
That's tough. I spend maybe 20 minutes a day just with the grading, because again, if you do a Google Classroom, has probably been the greatest way to grade something. Is with those slide presentations, I can grade them with 30 kids in my class. It takes me about 15 minutes straight because it's super easy to grade. But a minute investment on a green screen video that's going to engage kids and teach them something, I'm willing to make that 1 minute. Do I spend all my day sitting in front of a computer? No. That'd be horrible. But once you get a good template going, I just utilize it over and over and over again. Like the money thing is, I just have a template and I change the Bitmoji out and I change the story prompt out. It looks like it takes a long time. It takes like 5 minutes to make, and I can use that repeatedly in different ways.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Bryan, we had a question in the chat as well. They want to know if we could make your presentation available to people outside of JCPS. I think they're kind of just getting in the system and on their personal email again, and they really want to check it out. So that link that either you can create a new link, if you could share that with us, if you don't mind, we'll post that for them so they can get that on the media.
I just changed the permissions right now.
Awesome.
Perfect. Thanks, Bryan.
So
Any other last minute tips or tricks that you want to share with anybody? I know that was fantastic, but anything else that you were like, man, I had to leave that out because I was worried about time or anything?
No, but that's the thing is, I know 5 minutes from now I'm going to think of something. So again, just follow Twitter is the easiest way, because I'll figure something out like, oh my gosh, because that's how my mind thinks is there's so many things that I want to put out and then they just all get jumbled up. But no, follow me on Twitter. Probably the easiest way if there's something you really want to see.
Yeah, it's the best professional learning network out there is Twitter.
Oh, definitely.
Well, always learning so much. Well, Bryan, thanks again, so much cultural building there. We really appreciate you being on and sharing all those ideas. I love your postcard idea, the Flat Morrison, so much there with Do Ink. So really fantastic information and ideas.
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. I look forward to seeing you at my door too, brother.
All right, thank you so much. See you guys.
So again, everybody, I'm Jack Bosley, and I'm going to be moderating this morning session, and we've got just a few minutes before our next session starts. So I'm going to take you over to the the schedule for today, and we just finished up with student engagement in a virtual learning environment with Medora's Bryan Morrison. He had a whole lot of support from his colleagues at Medora in the chat. So just give us, if you're just now joining us and you missed that session, just be patient. Here within 24 to 48 hours, our team will have that video posted up to the JCPS Digital Learning channel. And speaking of which, if you go over to and just type in JCPS Digital Learning channel, you can go over there and see all the different videos that we have posted. And you can always go back to any of the sessions in case you missed them live. You can go back on demand and get those anytime with the power of pause. I know there are sometimes where where people in the audience feel like the presenters are going too fast, and that's the beauty of doing professional development like this, is that once these recordings are up on the channel, you can go back and watch those at your leisure and rewind over and over and over again and pause it as many times as you want, so that you make sure you're following along exactly with those presenters. So there's the learning channel. We've got hundreds of videos up there now. There are playlists that we're working on right now. Our team is focused on creating the Teacher NTI 2.0 playlist, and we are already adding very quickly the Family and Community playlist for NTI 2.0. So if you have parents that have questions about tools, digital tools or other items, you can refer them to this playlist on the JCPS Digital Learning channel. So let me go back over here, show you again the schedule. We've got Ryan New and Vincent Tinker, who are going to be joining us very, very soon, and they're going to be talking about how to build disciplinary and critical literacy during NTI. Next up at 10:30 is, those are the social studies folks, and after that, Lacey Eccles and Charlotte Ivy are going to be talking to our science teachers about setting norms during NTI. Later on today, Maddie Shepard and Christy Mudd are going to be talking about PBL during NTI. And to wrap up the morning session, it'll be Irma and Joe talking about PBL during NTI for our middle school folks. So let's go back over here, and I believe Vincent and Ryan are with us. Good morning, gentlemen.
Jack, what's up?
How are you, sir?
Morning. Good.
Long time.
You doing okay?
I'm doing all right. So yeah, you guys are, we've been exchanging some emails, but it's, I don't know, a little disappointing that we can't see each other face to face like the old days, I guess.
The old days, that, 8 months ago.
Yeah, the old days of March. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to do my best to share my screen here,
Okay.
But my internet is always a little wonky. So it turns out that even if you pay for the most, you still get the least. So I won't say who my is, but you guys can probably guess. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but Vincent is here as a backup as well for his, obviously, backup screen sharing, and he and I will be walking you guys through this. So let me go ahead and get this going here. First thing that I need to do is share my screen. Oh, a few times. I try to go as fast as I can on this. So, well, thank you guys very much for joining us. My name is Ryan New. I'm the instructional lead for social studies here in the district.
And I'm Vincent Tinker. I'm the social studies literacy coach.
So today our question is, how do you use disciplinary and critical literacies during NTI? So one of the things that we want to point out in this is that you can use this in a lot of different formats. Teachers have been super creative with how they're looking at it. They'll be less focused on how they might go about approaching it, right? And more about how they can actually build out their disciplinary and critical literacies with their students. These are two very important literacies that we don't want to see to the wayside during specifically this kind of time, and specifically with what's going on in our country. So speaking of which, why is disciplinary and critical literacy essential? So I'll give you guys just a second here to take in these images. Because everything 20, except for the declaration up there, right? But everything that we're sort of dealing with now has a history, and that history needs to be investigated with different types of literacies. But it also has a present,
And the present also needs to be investigated with these two different types of literacy. So disciplinary and critical literacy are going to be the foundational elements of how we come to understand what's going on in the world and how we start to and need to interpret what we're seeing.
So social studies has 4 different types of literacies that we look at here. And these literacies help, as Ryan mentioned, frame the sources, frame our lessons, frame the way in which we can view the world. To start with, we'll look at content literacy, which is looking at the ability to read and write in a given subject matter. Disciplinary literacy is thinking, reading, and writing in the way that is unique to the discipline. This is typically where you see thinking like a historian, thinking like a chemist, thinking like a geographer comes into play. What are the skills, what are the thinking practices that those people in those professional fields use, and have our students use those processes and skills in the classroom already? Obviously, that is part of what we will be discussing today. The other component that we're going to look at today is critical literacy, which is a lens and a framework of looking at power relationships that exist within sources and lessons that we'll be looking at. So they have a transformational approach for students so they can look at their communities and history in a different way. And the last one that I just want to mention here is information literacy. Our students are in a wash of Google searches and Facebook and internet and YouTube clips. How do they process all this information that is online and digital these days? There's all different kinds of data and research out there on this, but this is a developing field that we look at for the process of students looking at all this stuff and using skills so they can use this effectively in a classroom.
So what is disciplinary literacy in the social studies? So please note that when it comes to disciplinary literacy, it's very much grounded in the social studies. But when it comes to critical literacy, it goes across all contents, right? So when it comes to disciplinary literacy, we're looking at 4 major types. You're seeing 2 in the screen. I'll show you 2 in just a second. The first one is sourcing. Sourcing asks students to consider who wrote a document, as well as the circumstances of its creation, its time, place, purpose, point of view, origin, authority, structure, and context, which enables students to better understand the document or addressing its content. Sourcing is key to building claims and arguments as it helps with the inferencing, interpretation, corroboration, and contextualizing. Just this morning, I had a teacher who sent me a source and said, "What do you think of this source?" But she did not provide its place, its origin, who made it. And so those were my very first questions that I was going to ask her, in the same way that I would have my students ask those questions of any type of source that we're investigating. Where it comes from is super important. And that's something that we're trying to get kids to be able to see. Contextualization of a source considers relevant components of history occurring at the time of the source's construction. It gives it an understanding of why it might be there. By placing a source in its relevant time and place and understanding how factors like setting, motivation, author's competence, preceding and following events, and objectivity influence the creation of the source, students can better understand and utilize the source. So having a source in your hands or having some kind of document means that you have to figure out, why is it occurring? For example, I worked with a professor at UK who was doing a seminar on content literacy. And then we were looking at this story written by a Chinese immigrant. And I happened to notice, right, because I was sourcing it, that it was in 1950 when this was written. Well, the context of the period is that the Chinese government had just recently in 1949 gone communist, and that ultimately the Cold War is happening. So this gives a great background of explaining some of the feelings and ideas that were present inside that story. So sourcing and contextualization are coupled with corroboration and close reading. Corroboration compares sources to identify agreements and disagreements. It's how we strengthen ideas, right? By seeing what multiple people have to say about the same thing. Given multiple perspectives of an event allows students to discount contrary evidence and prove a source's validity and reliability by explaining discrepancies between accounts of an event. When multiple sources point to similar conclusions, interpretations are improved, allowing students to begin making correlational and causal claims. Corroboration improves the integrity of a source because it involves checking and cross-checking evidence, both which help contextualize the source. So you can see that there's a lot of overlap in disciplinary literacy and social studies. And finally, we have close reading. Close reading calls on students to infer from a source's subtext. By annotating the text, taking perspective, paying attention to detail, asking questions, and seeking clarifications, students are more likely to engage with and think about a source. Close reading calls upon students to first source information, followed by recognizing claims, a supporting piece of evidence, and overall rhetoric, all to help students construct arguments from sources. So when it comes to looking at how we go about constructing and thinking about arguments, or even how we might even approach a document, these disciplinary literacies allow students to develop skills that they can use throughout the rest of their day and hopefully throughout the rest of their lives. So that, for example, if they get this tweet, should I retweet this thing? I don't know. Who's the person who's doing this? What's the context of the time? Do other people say the same thing? And what is this tweet really saying, right, about it? Those questions are really the 4 disciplines that we just looked at. Vincent?
But as we also take into consideration critical literacy, this is a literacy that does go across all the different disciplines, not just social studies. So let's look at some of the key aspects that live within critical literacy. The first one I'd like to begin with is taking into consideration that it is a lens, a frame, or a perspective that the student or the reader and the teacher are taking as they move through a source, a text, a graphic, or a lesson that they are approaching. What is the lens, frame, or perspective of critical literacy, though? It is a focus on looking at power structures, looking at access, and looking at diversity. So it's taking a slightly different lens. While Ryan described disciplinary literacy as it applied to social studies, which those are typical historical lenses and approaches to text and sources. This is looking at it from a different lens of power and access and diversity. And as we move into critical literacy, we need to think about the lived experiences of our students, and quite often even the teachers, in going into a lesson. That students come in with their different cultural backgrounds, their own family structures, the different lives that they have all lived. With 30 different students in a classroom, you have 30 different experiences, 30 different lives that have shaped their progress into that class. And the student and the teacher and everybody is in that community within that classroom. And that should be reflected also within the curriculum. And taking into consideration of those students and lives that are within your classroom, the teacher needs to think about relevant sources, whether it's the student looking for the sources or the teacher looking for the sources. They need to take into consideration the types of sources that will live within a curriculum, that will live within a lesson, because those sources need to represent multiple perspectives. As Ryan talked about corroboration, multiple perspectives through corroboration would help demonstrate different viewpoints and perspectives. And by students being able to see these different perspectives through corroboration, they can hopefully see themselves sometimes within this, and it's fine if they don't see themselves within the source. But the idea is with the multiple perspectives, it helps create that agency. And as you look at sources, we always have to take into consideration that sources are not neutral. They are written by authors, sometimes committees. They are written by different groups or governments. Some of them are historical, some of them are current, but they all come in with the attempt to do something to a reader. They're written with a purpose. They're created with a purpose, and they're trying to shape the reader of that time or the student into some way of thinking, creating some kind of claim or point of view. The students need to understand that these sources have a perspective, and that we are looking at that perspective through that given lens, through critical literacy. And as we approach all these various sources, students start to identify some of these problems, and they start seeing what are some of the issues that we see within the sources or within the given lesson or the supporting question of that day. And the students are deconstructing and reconstructing those problems throughout that process. And to conclude with some of the aspects here, we are looking at readers are not neutral. When you look at the lived experiences, the types of relevant sources, the bias that might exist within the sources, and the problems that might come up through those sources, through the entire lens of critical literacy, our students are going to approach all that in different ways because they have those different unique experiences With 30 students, you might have 30 different points of views, approaches, and processes that they have as they approach that given source or lesson. So here's our critical literacy framework. We have 3 core parts: identity, challenging the source, and action. Let's begin with identity. Identity is the idea of looking at the students' lived experiences. This is a fluid process. Identity is something that is changing and shaping throughout their entire lives. As you even see on our graphic here, it is at the beginning of any lesson, but it is beyond the action. It's beyond the challenging the source. It is something that is continual throughout their entire experience. What do we do when we look at identity? We look at students evaluating their self-identity, their social identity, who they are before a lesson or a source, who are they during, and who are they after. The idea of lessons is to learn something and to experience something. Who are they during that experience? Who are they after that experience of whatever class they might be in at that given moment? And we take into consideration some of those key aspects. The student's lived experience is involved in identity, that those readers are not neutral is involved in that identity, and that those sources have to be relevant based on the identities of the students that are in a given classroom. The next one on our critical literacy framework here is challenging the source. This is sometimes called deconstructing a source. This is the most common way in which teachers typically approach critical literacy. It's some of those questions that we'll look at here later in this presentation. Challenging the source is a variety of different ways in which we can look at sources and text within a given lesson. This is critical language awareness, looking at how the text was structured, what word choices were involved in that, how does the reader approach that. This is text analysis. This is readers becoming critics, not accepting the neutrality of a source, that they are biased possibly, and that the student is also trying to make meaning by deconstructing that source, by challenging that source. So again, those key aspects would be looking at sources not being neutral, that you're looking at those sources through a framework of looking for power, access, and diversity. And then also, we have literacy alignment tools in social studies in which we have dozens of questions in which teachers and students can try to challenge those sources to make more sense and make meaning of the text that might be in front of them. And the last component is action. We don't want to simply just deconstruct sources and challenge those sources and identify problems and just leave it there in a given lesson. We want students to feel empowered, to embrace that student agency, because critical literacy is that transformative practice. And so what are we doing in this? This could be reconstructing a given source. Maybe they read something or a book and they can reconstruct it. They can rewrite it to make it address the problems that they identified in it. They can redesign, they can create from new and try to solve those problems. This can be done through taking informed action or even action civics, as we have partnered with MICFA to develop action civics within our district also. So as we mentioned, that we do have dozens and dozens of questions that we could use for disciplinary literacy and critical literacy. This is just a select group of some of our favorites that we would use in looking at sources, which we'll get to experience here in a minute, within the disciplinary literacy categories. We have aligned our critical literacy questions to fit within the disciplinary questions, as you see here, with sourcing, contextualization, corroboration, and close reading. And we'll practice some of these here in a minute.
Yeah, so how does questioning help engage sources and make meaning? So what we're doing here is basically saying that the best way, right, of really getting your students to engage in disciplinary, even in your own discipline, or into critical literacies, is to figure out what questions are worthy to use with your students. Now, this can be done asynchronously or even synchronously, but imagine taking source or questions like this and having your students to engage in them. Why this matters is that it gives something students to talk about. It allows for the multiple perspectives and identities of students to come out as they're looking at the sources so that they can start to reason together. Questions bring us to a common beginning place so that we can use our own talents in order to reason together to solve problems and take action. That's essentially what Vincent's talking about. And it can begin, right, with those questions. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a little fun here. As much fun can be had online and on a Monday. And we've got a source for you. We chose this source because we figured most people might recognize this source. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the questions here to sort of talk about how you might think about these questions with these sources. So I'm going to take the disciplinary literacy part. Vincent's going to take the critical literacy part. So if I see this, if I give this to my students, I want them to think about who did this, right? Because this has a particular point of view, right? This source does. And it doesn't look like it's going to be good for the British. Spoiler, it's not. But essentially here, the author's point of view, if I were to have the students do that, the author's point of view here is that this is a massacre, right? Now, we might have to do some close reading, right? And you can see how these would overlap. But I don't see any guns on the left-hand side. I don't see any rocks or sticks or batons. I mean, heck, they even have a dog on the other side, right? And what I see is a bunch of soldiers just shooting into the crowd, right? So I need to know more about this. Who was this? Because if I find out that this was someone on the British side, that would really change my point of view. But in fact, it wasn't. And so now it's like, oh, okay, I see where this might go. Vincent?
So for critical literacy, look at the first bullet there. You would see that whose interest does the author serve? Well, we famously know that this is Paul Revere's best possibly propaganda for the war that we've ever seen, because we're still obviously talking about it today. When you look at who does this serve, as Ryan was kind of describing the scene that you're seeing here, you see an organized line of British troops firing upon supposedly an unarmed crowd. If this is propaganda, which we know that it was at the time, how would this serve that group? Obviously, it's not going to be serving the British here. This is going to be served as supporting the colonists and making them look like victims. How's the location informing the cultural context or the place? We know the name of the massacre. It's famously known as the Boston Massacre. And so that would help provide that extra layer of contextualization of what is going on in Boston at this time that would demonstrate why this massacre and this demonstration, as the image that Paul Revere wants us to know, looks like in this case.
Yeah, so let's just, now we would never recommend giving all these questions to students, right? That you're going to have to pick and choose those questions and layering them in over time so that students get more used to developing the types of questions they would use for a source. So if this were my classroom and I were just doing sourcing and not all the four that we're getting ready to get into, then I might just choose, what's the author's point of view? Or maybe whose interest does the author serve, right? I might have a total of 1 to 5 questions to be able to look at each source with the students. Sometimes we can just spend too much time on one source when in fact we need to move on, right? So when it comes to contextualizing, remember this is about what's going on around that same time period. So here's a couple questions when it comes to disciplinary literacy. How might the circumstances in which the document was created affect its content? So we know that there's a lead up to this, right? I'm not going to go and bore everybody on a Monday morning with all the historical background, but we do know that there was some circumstances that led up to this. And we do know, as Vincent just pointed out, that not everybody's on board with this, right? There's plenty of people in the colonies who said, you know what, the British, they've done me right. I don't want to go against them, right? It's you upstarts that are the problem. Right? So it allows us to sort of see, did everybody actually think about this at the same time, right? And this goes back again to the sourcing about why this document might be created, right? So Vincent?
Yes, and for the critical literacy approach, you're looking at how the source is informed by political agendas, historical and social, and obviously focusing on the marginalized group. The question is, I would have for this, if I was in the class teaching this source, is who is maybe Paul Revere defining as a marginalized group in this? Typically, we would be looking in critical literacy at race or gender or other different factors. Paul Revere appears to want us to think of which group is the marginalized group if we're looking at power structures within this photograph here, this image. That would be, obviously, he's thinking that the colonists are maybe the marginalized group and they're being oppressed. And as I've already mentioned, this is an example of propaganda. So they're trying to get you in a position of thinking that this is what's happening in Boston during this time for the context of this, and that the colonists are in a position of lack of power, and the British is the oppressor obviously happening within that. Now, we could expand into race of this time. We could expand into gender roles of this time. But I was taking it through necessarily the lens of the author in this case.
Yeah, and I think that, Vincent, you and I were talking about this morning, that Crispus Attucks was famously killed in this Boston Massacre. And as a Black man, he is not being portrayed here. And you were mentioning some background that you found out about specifically him. Do you mind to share that?
Yes, it might be hard to see in the image, but there's 3 people that look like they were shot here on the lower left that Ryan is trying to highlight here. And supposedly, Crispus is the farther left here with the 2 shots in the chest. He's famously known as the first African-American and first person to die, possibly of what is considered the revolution. But Paul Revere actually kind of buries him a little bit in the photograph or in the image here of the people. And based on some of my reading on this is, as this got distributed to other colonies, they said that in some of the images, they tried to make him look less like an African-American and more like a white colonist because they thought that might shift the portraying of this image in those colonies at the time.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic understanding of looking at that, and when you know what you're trying to show when you're not trying to show it, right? That's what critical literacy is at its heart, right? The third one here is corroboration, right? The word that no student can ever say, right? Corroboration. And this is when sources are speaking together. Now here, we only have one source. We should tell you something about at least social studies. We would never do this, right? Ever have just one lesson with just one source. We got to look at other sources because we don't know how sources agree. If this is the only document that we ever had from the colonial period, that would really inform our understanding of what's happening. We may not even be able to say it's propaganda, as Vincent was saying earlier, right? This is all that we would have. So the more that you have of an event, the more reliable it comes, right? So that, for example, this was done almost 2 weeks, this etching, almost 2 weeks after the Boston Massacre, right? So it's happening 2 weeks later, right? So a different rendering. It's not like Paul Revere had his, Etch-a-Sketch out there doing it while it was happening, right? But we could actually look at the trial that happens afterwards when John Adams is defending the British soldiers and see what they have to say about this, right? Now we've got 2 pieces of evidence, but you might say, but it's their account, but we have more accounts of the colonists that are going on there too. And the issue is that we're trying to, just as a judge would, try to weigh the evidence that has been gathered on behalf of claims that are being made, right? To be able to determine its credibility and its reliability in a certain place. Vincent?
And that's exactly what I would look at with critical literacy. It's what alternative sources can be provided that challenge what's happening here. And so I've even made the statement, and sometimes teachers do this, I've already set maybe a perspective on this by saying that it was propaganda. How do we know that? How do we know that this isn't necessarily an accurate portrayal? I would have, as you've already mentioned, looked at the trial that John Adams actually defended the British in that process. And there you would have testimony from witnesses, testimony from the members of the British military that were actually there, and we can actually read their accounts of what happened during that process. And so we get a more accurate portrayal of what is happening in the Boston Massacre, other than just Paul Revere's version. We get to see what was maybe other versions from the people that were there, not just Paul Revere, which we're not exactly sure if Paul Revere was even a witness of any of this versus trying to create an image for other political or social gain here. And then we can look at gaps and silences here also, as we mentioned earlier, on who's being misrepresented and how Paul Revere has chosen to illustrate that, as we mentioned earlier with Crispus Attucks.
Yeah, we can even add in there, Vincent, that there's no women, it seems to be present, right? So what does that then start to tell us about what's going on? It doesn't seem to be children present, right? Anyway, just interesting. Okay, so the final one here, and the one that's probably less social studies and more everybody else, is close reading, right? So what evidence does the author use? What language, words, and phrases and symbols does the author use to persuade the source's audience, right? So Vincent and I have covered quite a bit of this as we've now had you look at this one document for 20 minutes to find out how are they doing this, right? The plume of smoke that's coming up, right? My daughter used this source in one of the lessons that we created. And she did not like this because the red blood that was there. She wanted me to find one that was more black and white because she found it too, or I guess not PG enough, right? So this is something to sort of take in consideration, right? That there's blood being spilled, right, by one group and not the other. That there's perpetrators and victims, right, inside of this. So Vincent?
Yes, and I would, for the sake of time here, I would show that this image is really actually trying to empower a certain group of people through looking at the lens of them being victims. By the British taking such a stance, Paul Revere has drafted this up to actually empower colonists against the British through the victimhood of the Boston Massacre here.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is just a few ways then of looking at how sources can be investigated types of questions that you ask students, right? So I'm going to go back through real quick just to this slide here to sort of show you that you don't have to choose all of these. And by the way, these are just a select group. Has been working on questions that are aligning disciplinary literacy and critical literacy and even information literacy around sourcing, contextualization, corroboration, and close reading. And he's even aligned these to map indicators, right? I know a real application of map of being able to see how these questions can not only better our citizens, right, but can also better understand where they are when it comes to their own skill level, right? So this has been our presentation, quick as it may be, and we're happy to come and be able to zoom in with you guys to talk further about using disciplinary and critical literacies, but that it is essential during this time not to continue to allow students just to read for information. That's not good enough. It's not good enough for our students. It's not good enough for our democracy. It's not good enough for our school system or our community. And that we need to really focus on whatever the discipline literacy is for your discipline, being partnered with the critical literacies of how we're envisioning what students are studying. So thank you guys very much for this, and we'll look forward to any emails that you have to send us. And if there's any questions in the chat, which neither of us can see right now. So anything?
Ryan, Vincent, thank you so much. It was pretty quiet, other than the fact that they just want your slide deck whenever you can get that to our team, so we can link that out. But we can do that. But great information. My background as a social studies teacher, so I'm just eating all of this up and love how much time you can actually spend on one primary source like that and look at it. And with those two. With both disciplinary and critical literacy skills and those questions, it's so fascinating to me to think about. And you kind of alluded to that earlier about how important that is, even in today's culture of social media. And there's just a lot of crossover. It doesn't have to just be the Boston Massacre. You can use that for Twitter and Facebook and lots of great. It's a great skill set for students and parents to know about.
Yeah, and we thought about doing one that was more modern, but we didn't want to be political or seen that way in any shape or form. But if you want us to have examples of that, we've got plenty to show you. And I know that Lacey is loving the fact that you've got 3 social studies folks here. And let me just say that whatever she's about to say, you also need to teach science, right? And trust science, because without science and social studies, I don't know how you make sense of the social or physical world. So thank you guys very much. And Jack, I went ahead and sent that PowerPoint to Heather earlier.
Okay.
Should I send it to you as well?
No, that's fine. That's who needs to get it. So.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, guys. See you soon, I hope.
Yep. Good luck, Lacey.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
So good morning again, everybody. I'm Jack Bosley with the Digital Innovation Team, and I am moderating this morning's sessions. Be sure to pop over into the chat and let us know where you teach, who you are, and if you have any questions. And up next, we have Lacey Eccles. And Lacey, is Charlotte going to be joining you, or do you know?
She's moderating the chat.
Oh, I got you. Perfect. That's even better. So
yes.
That always helps to have an expert over there that can answer those subjects.
Yes, both Charlotte Ivy and Michelle Tedford are monitoring the chat. So
awesome. Well,
answer y'all's questions.
Lacey, I'm going to turn it over to you. You're going to be talking about how to set norms in the science NTI classroom today. Is that right?
That is correct.
All right.
All right. Do you see my screen? My closed captions are set on, so I think we're good. All right.
No problem. Not my first rodeo. So, hi everyone. My name is Lacey Eccles, and I am the K-12 Science Lead. And welcome to Staying Grounded When Going Remote, Setting Norms in NTI Science. So, as we go back to school in a new and very virtual way, it is so important in all subject areas to stay grounded in the routines and procedures that we know are impactful in our brick and mortar settings. We just have to take those routines and procedures and translate them into an NTI setting. And so one of those important routines is collaboratively setting classroom norms. And that's the routine that we're going to talk about today, and how we can stay grounded in that routine, even though we're in a remote setting. So a lot of the resources we're going to share have been adapted from the Open SciEd resources, which is an open source science curriculum for middle school science, and they're just getting ready to start on elementary and high school. And spoiler alert, it's a curriculum that we're going to begin phasing in JCPS in the upcoming years as a fabulous option, and I can't wait. So let's get started. So developing collaborative norms is a critical component to any rich science classroom. And we know that rich science learning happens in classrooms where students are positioned as those knowledge constructors and sense makers, and where us as teachers, we're leveraging students' experiences and ideas as our class collaboratively works together to develop these explanations of these cool science phenomena. So in this presentation, we're going to offer some suggestions for developing and maintaining norms that promote safe, student-driven learning experiences in these remote learning environments. Establishing and maintaining norms is an essential step in developing an equitable learning community that's grounded by trusting and caring relationships, grounded by a shared understanding and appreciation for diversity, and grounded in a student's sense of belonging in the science classroom. And since storyline instruction, the type of instruction we endorse on our frameworks, is founded on the premise of we figure it out together, it's critical to keep your classroom community learning together. It also signals that, spoiler alert, students are responsible for meaning making. And so in JCPS Science, we encourage this early construction of an important frequent revisiting of classroom norms that allows students to see themselves as those knowers and doers of science. One of the ways that we can support students in developing an equitable science classroom is for those teachers and students to work together to co-construct a set of norms that makes those students the knowledge constructors in the classroom. And this shifts students from that passive receptor of information to being actively involved in building ideas. And norms in science are often organized into these familiar categories. So respectful, equitable, committed to community, and moving science thinking forward. So if we have a classroom that is respectful, we are respectful and make classrooms safe places for sharing. We have a classroom that is equitable, so everyone's ideas and participation are valued. We have a classroom that supports a commitment to community because we are learning together, and a classroom that's going to move science thinking forward as students work together to figure things out. So many of you have seen this example before of classroom norms in some professional development from the science office. And these are norms that promote meaningful science learning in a brick and mortar classroom. And you've probably in the past developed your own version of these with your students. So today, we want to think about how we can continue to care for our learning communities that we've worked so hard to create. So this is an example from Open SciEd that students co-constructed. And so you'll notice that the 4 categories on the left from the previous slide are kind of translated into more student friendly language. So we have respectful, but we've said our classroom is a safe place to share. We have equitable, and in that we say everyone's participation and ideas are valued. We have committed to community, where we say we learn together. We have moving our science thinking forward. So we work to figure things out. And so in a brick and mortar setting, and the way that this example was developed was these kind of 4 topics were posted around a classroom, and students were asked to kind of rotate and chart what that might look like, sound like, and feel like. So what are those actions that should exist in order for these things to exist in our classroom? And they came up with these examples of classroom norms. And so I just want to highlight a couple that I just love. We critique the ideas we are working with, but not the people we are working with. That is an example of how we can have a respectful classroom. Under equitable, a lot of these are very practical, like we monitor our own floor time, we give people time to think. But I really like this last one. We recognize and value that people think, share, and represent their ideas in different ways. Committed to our community, all very practical. This last one, I think, is something that we'll definitely need to think about in the NTI classroom. We speak clearly and loud enough so everyone can hear. And that really is a critical piece to being able to learn together. We can't learn together if I can't hear you. And then on their examples that the students came up with on moving our science thinking forward, oh my gosh, I love them all. We use and build on others' ideas. That is science. We back up our ideas with evidence. We ask for evidence. We suggest ways to get additional evidence. Evidence. We ground our thinking in evidence, which is how we can work together to figure things out. That third bullet, we're open to changing our minds, helping students with that growth mindset in science. And then I love we challenge ourselves to think beyond the obvious. So these are examples of norms that were created by students in a middle school classroom, kind of in that brick and mortar setting. And so we need to begin to think about how we can translate this into a more virtual environment. So as you begin thinking about collaborative norm development, here are a few questions we want to consider. Many of these we will kind of talk through in this really quick 30-minute session. So what norms represent best practices for remote learning environments, strategies to support norm development in synchronous versus asynchronous. How can we foster norms for learning that complement students' family norms and current circumstances? And then really importantly, how can we model our collaborative norms in a virtual setting? Creating norms in a face-to-face classroom, like we said earlier, often begins with students describing and agreeing on actions that reflect the ideals that we just described on that previous slide. And this is a practice that can absolutely be useful in a remote environment, but we've just got to attend to those specific features and constraints that technology presents us with. In your efforts to establish norms for this remote learning setting, we've always got to remember that learning is messy, even under the best of circumstances. And so we've got to be flexible and remember that perfection is definitely not the goal. So when we think about co-constructing norms, it can be done in a variety of ways, both synchronous and asynchronous. And so this slide has some specific strategies that support some co-construction of norms. I'm not going to read them all to you. I just want to highlight a couple that I think actually go really well with a lot of the technology-based professional learning that the Digital Learning Channel has been giving about specific technology platforms that are useful. And so if we think about that synchronous setting, using a virtual whiteboard with stickies and getting consensus on some shared norms that way, and maybe grouping those ideas together, you could do that very much in a synchronous setting, but you could also do that same task in an asynchronous setting where we might use a digital board to collect ideas, allowing all students to maybe return to them at a later time and analyze them and add comments to them. Another piece under the synchronous that is more about once we have those norms established is that I really like is this one right here. Revisiting norms often and drawing attention to a specific norm for that learning session. So maybe we are in the explain phase of the 5E cycle, and we're about to share ideas and build on each other's ideas. And we really need to focus on our respectful norms. And so bringing that to the foreground during that lesson and reminding students and having a focus on some specific norms for that learning session, I think is a powerful practice. Another one on asynchronous is allowing students to react to, vote for, or add ideas to a suggested list of norms. So maybe we have a suggested list of norms that are already there, and we're asking students, how can we take this suggested list and translate it into a virtual setting? And students are in an asynchronous environment adding ideas to it. And taking time to check in and connect with students, I think, is also really important during this remote learning norms development. So when we think about the 4 categories of classroom norms, right? Respectful, equitable, committed to community, and moving science thinking forward, we have also got to model those in synchronous and asynchronous settings. And so the next several slides are going to walk through some considerations around our learning environment as it relates to each of these norming categories. So if we're thinking about that first norming category of a focus on a respectful learning environment, how can we model that? How can we give students tools in order to make sure that that's a living and breathing practice? Well, one of those strategies that is a powerful practice in a regular brick and mortar classroom setting is talk moves. And those powerful practices can also be used in a virtual learning environment. And so linked down here are 4 different talk moves. And so I want to look at, I want to look at a couple of those. So the first one is the Talk Moves protocol, and that looks like this. It's a talk activities flowchart where, let's say, the purpose of our talk activity today is to reach consensus. And the next question is, are you going to moderate that discussion? Maybe my answer is, yeah, I am. I'm curious about what they're thinking. Then it takes you down to a specific protocol that you can use called All Class Science Talk. And each of those protocols are outlined here. And so this is a powerful practice to give us a protocol to help structure those conversations to make sure that we are still focusing on a respectful learning environment. My ultimate favorite one is this communicating in scientific ways. And this is really for secondary, so middle and high school settings. So in a brick and mortar classroom, I would have this posted on the wall. I'd have it posted on the desk. I'd have it tattooed on my arms, anywhere students can see it. So this helps students with what a scientist does and translating that into what a scientist says. Sentence stems are really important because students aren't used to having to communicate in scientific ways. And also, sometimes they kind of stink at being respectful in their communication. And so this is a strategy and a tool that you can also use in the virtual setting. So maybe I am about to listen to others' ideas and ask clarifying questions. So a scientist would say, so are you saying that? Or what do you mean, Lacey, when you say, that's a way that is very respectful to ask some clarifying questions. Or maybe we're down here where I want to agree or disagree with others' ideas. So I agree with Charlotte because, or I want to add to what Michelle said. So these are strategies to help students communicate in scientific ways, but also be respectful. And then another one I want to look at is, what if I'm a primary teacher? So this is linked on there, my Classroom Talk iPad. And so it's different categories for if I'm a first grader and I want to tell about something. That's when we explain our thinking. I might start by saying, well, I think, or I noticed. And so these are talk move protocols that are still very powerful and useful in the virtual setting, and also is a way for us to demonstrate having a respectful learning environment. Over here in the asynchronous setting, I think it's really important to point out that students need to know that others are going to read and respond to your comments in that asynchronous setting. And so if that's going to happen, this next one, we've got to develop respectful comment or feedback starters. How about have you considered giving students some specific sentence starters when they're providing feedback or commenting on student work in that asynchronous environment is really critical to help continue to build that respectful learning environment. And you should be able to take a lot of these synchronous talk moves protocols and find the ones that are appropriate for an asynchronous setting. So if we have a focus on an equitable learning environment, then these are some strategies that we can use to help live and breathe that norm. And so I think it's really important to point out that we need to use strategies to manage speaking, such as each person nominating another to speak until all have spoken, or other types of strategies to help manage speaking so that everybody has the opportunity to share in that synchronous learning session. And that might mean that up here, using and rotating breakout groups is a way to help continue to do that. In that asynchronous setting, I think it's really important to provide opportunities for students to share in different ways, such as videos or written responses or images. That's a way to continue to foster that equitable learning environment. So if we look at the focus on committed to community, encouraging patience, support, and kindness among the group, paying particular attention maybe to those who might be new to technology or selected platforms, that's a way to help us continue to be focused on our community, and finding a way in that asynchronous setting to honor all contributions. And really the most important box of all, I think, on this committed to community is this provide support for parents. Parents are a part of our learning environment now more than ever. And so they are a part of our community. And so we've got to make sure that we include support for parents in our norms for remote learning, providing tutorials, online meetings potentially for parents, overviews of assignments, videoing myself, explaining an assignment so that when parents are helping students with it, they feel like they are part of our learning community. Links to helpful websites, etc. Those are different strategies to help us kind of embody that commitment to community. And then finally, that focus on moving science thinking forward. So establishing structures in that synchronous environment for quick teacher to student and peer-to-peer feedback. In science, we move our thinking forward through collaboration, through feedback, both peer-to-peer, teacher to student, and we can't lose that in a virtual setting. And so we've got to be thinking really strategically about what structures can we set in place for that powerful practice to still exist in both the synchronous and asynchronous learning environment. Synchronous for moving science thinking forward, utilizing breakout groups for small group discussions and processing, kind of before that whole group sharing. So when we think about that 5E cycle, right? So we engage kids, then kiddos explore, then kiddos explain, and they might explain several times. And that's how they move that science thinking forward. And so really thinking about which part of that's going to sit in that synchronous and which part of that's going to sit in that asynchronous. And those small great breakout groups are critical for moving science thinking forward. In that asynchronous setting, engaging in asynchronous discussion boards absolutely is critical in moving science thinking forward. And then setting those expectations for contributing and responding to asynchronous discussions. How do we do that in Ms. Eccles' classrooms? What are Ms. Eccles' expectations for when we contribute and respond to asynchronous discussions? Give me some examples, Ms. Eccles, of what does that look like? What does that sound like? That is what's going to help move science thinking forward. And then I think this is a really sweet one, establishing a buddy system potentially, and encouraging students to agree on times to meet online to collaborate on activities so that students are bouncing ideas off of each other. That collaboration aspect is so powerful in the brick and mortar classroom that we've got to continue to take that powerful practice and use it in our NTI setting, because that's the way that we move science thinking forward. So as a final note, when we're working and learning remotely, that often means sharing space with others, right? Competing for limited technological resources. dividing attention between what's going on in my learning activity and materials and the going-ons of the out-of-classroom environment. And we've got to remember that even under the best of circumstances, distractions and unexpected interruptions are inevitable. So we've got to invite and offer gratitude. Teachers and learners in remote settings, we've got to operate from the standpoint of compassion and assuming the best intentions of each other. And classroom norms is a powerful way to do that. And so if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Charlotte Ivy is here to answer them. And we are just so thrilled that you guys joined us today. And so I'm here to answer any questions that might have appeared in the chat box.
Lacey, thank you so much. I think that's such a great way to end, to talk about compassion and, just everybody. The expectation is that we're all trying to do our best with the current situation.
Yeah, and I think setting classroom norms is a way to a powerful way to remind us that if we have these compassionate classroom norms, we can always fall back on that and realize that we're assuming the best intentions, right?
That's right.
And I think classroom norms are imperative in a brick and mortar setting, but I think they're probably just as, if not more imperative in this virtual setting.
Yeah. Well, your slides and your presentation are going to help so many people. I love that constant comparison between synchronous and asynchronous all throughout that, and the slide that you have on those norms. That, did you say middle school kids came up with those earlier?
Yeah, so those were middle school. I mean, I think the teacher, I know the teacher wordsmithed them a little bit, but I mean, those were norms that were developed by, a group of middle school kiddos based on those 4 categories. And although this is a science-specific PowerPoint, I think those norms can go with any subject area, right? Like if we're asking students to be the knowledge constructors and the doers of science or the doers of math, then collaborative norms, I think, are imperative across all disciplines.
Yeah, I agree, Lacey. I mean, you're absolutely right about those norms. It kind of reminds me of what, some of the items that Ryan and Vincent were talking about, how cross curricular those activities with disciplinary and critical literacy are. That's good information for everybody. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, although Ryan's K-12 social studies and I'm K-12 science, a lot of the things that we have to say and our colleagues have to say, I think, can cross silos and actually probably bring those silos together a whole lot more than apart.
Yeah, agreed. And that's another one of the main mantras on our team is trying to tear down those silos and to get teachers to think about what they're teaching.
Absolutely. So, I mean, please feel free to reach out to me, JCPS family. We're here to help. We're here to learn from you as well. And so as you embark on making those kind of collaborative norms with your kiddos, share them with us. We'd love to tweet them out. We'd love to see some examples of what your classroom communities come up with in regards to developing norms.
Lacey, how do they find you on Twitter? Was it on that last one? At Lacey
Not very complicated.
All right, perfect.
Yeah, please tag me in those tweets. I'd love to see it. Or invite me to join your collaborative communities. I'd love to be a part of the development.
All right. Well, Lacey, thanks again for being on here today and sharing all that information.
My pleasure. Till we meet again.
That's right.
All right, bye.
Bye. So you all, I'm Jack Bosley with the Digital Innovation Team, and coming up next here in just a few minutes, we're going to have Maddie Shepard and Christy Mudd joining us, who are going to be talking about PBL during NTI for elementary, at the elementary level. And while we have a few minutes, let me just take you over to the schedule, the master schedule that we are using, so you can see. what is happening today and the rest of the week. We just finished up with Lacey talking about science norms. This afternoon, after lunch, we're going to have Lynn Reynolds, the awesome Dr. Lynn Reynolds, talking about the JCPS library online. And Ryan New and Suzanne Kramer are going to be coming back on. And a big session this afternoon with Jan Richardson. I know so many schools are using her work. And then we will have individualized instruction during NTI. And finishing us off this afternoon will be Alan Young and Justin Elliott talking about the backpack of success skills at home. So one of the things, even if you can't join us live during this, you can always go to the JCPS Digital Learning channel and see any of these sessions. We try to get these edited and posted as soon as we can, so that you can get the videos on demand and watch these over and over again. So just check out JCPS Digital Learning channel. Make sure you subscribe to that, and you can go into the videos area or the playlist. And another item that I find super helpful is going over to this magnifying glass and using that to search. So if you're just looking for something like Google, or let's do something a little bit more specific, like virtual reality, you can see the different shows that we have had in the past with VR. So the Digital Learning channel is your go-to place for on-demand professional development anytime. So let's go back over here and see. Yes. Hey, Christy, Maddie, how are you all?
I'm good, Jack. How are you?
Doing well, doing well.
You're right, that search feature is awesome. I literally just used it maybe 4 minutes ago
Yep.
on the Digital Learning channel.
That's right. Use
It's
it
my best friend.
all the time. Use it all the time. So are you all ready to go? Do you mind if we get started maybe a minute or two early? Is that okay?
Yeah, we can do that. I'm going to share my screen.
Perfect.
I'm going to go ahead and preemptively apologize. My dogs are downstairs, so we shouldn't be able to hear them. But there apparently is a lot of action across the street. So if you hear dogs barking and I can't abate them, sorry about that. I know, like, what are they thinking? But yeah, so Christy, Mudd, and I are going to be doing a session today on what project-based learning could look like in NTI. We're both deeper learning resource teachers. Christy is new to the team, and we're super happy to have her. I'm technically your Zone 2 deeper learning contact. I do general zone support for Zone 2, but the deeper learning team has tons of projects and initiatives that we work on with pretty much everyone. So you can contact any one of us, but I'm your Zone 2 contact. And then I know Christy's going to want to introduce herself as well. Yes. Yes. Here we go. Sorry about that, Jack.
Yes, I'm Christy Mudd. So yes, I am new to the team. And I am mostly going to be working with AIS schools, but as Maddie mentioned, with all kinds of different projects, we're going to be working with everyone. So anyway, you can contact me with any questions, email or Twitter. I do tweet a lot, so you can definitely find me there.
All right, we'll jump in. So the first thing that we wanted to give an overview of is this nuanced difference between projects and project-based learning. So typically when we think about a project, it's very linear in nature. We have our regular mini lessons, our regular activities, our regular formative assessments and quizzes, and the instructional process doesn't really change. And then surprise, we have a project at the end. And it is just that, a project. The difference between project-based learning is just a difference in packaging. So you'll notice that the same gray components from here at the top of the graphic are also present at the bottom. They're just packaged in a different way.
So, and Christy will talk about this in just a minute, we always begin with a project launch to engage the learners. And then after that launch, after we share that guiding question that will really root us in the heart of the PBL, then we conduct workshops that go over content and skills that kids will need to be successful throughout the PBL. There's homework, there's research, there are labs, there are benchmarks, just like a regular instructional process, and reflections. The difference is that it's all rooted in the context of the project-based learning unit and the guiding question. All the things that kids are doing here in red, the simulations, the activities, the discussions, the lectures, they're all rooted in the PBL. They're all connected. They're all on content and skills the kids will need to create their product here at the end. And then finally, we share the products, and then we reflect. Christy, anything you want to add about these kinds of differences in process?
Well, and I was going to touch on this in the next slide too, is that I feel like when I've had this discussion, projects versus project-based learning, oftentimes the main thing that's missing is the authenticity or the purpose. And that kind of adds in the project-based learning, like learning as you go. Too often it kind of comes off as an icing on the cake at a very end project. But if you build that purpose in the beginning with your driving question and your entry events, then it kind of changes into the actual learning of the content. So if you want to go to the next slide. So here is where these are kind of the components or the characteristics of a gold standard PBL. And you'll notice that authenticity is on here, and authenticity to students might look very different than authenticity to the adults. So this is also where I've done quite a few presentations on building the classroom community and getting to know your students. Because the more you know your students and the more you know about their interests, the better you can gauge some of these projects that you might design. Because you do want to allow for student authenticity and student voice and choice. And the more you know about them, obviously, the better you can create that. I also like the student voice and choice is a big part too, but authenticity, I feel like, is what's missing most of the time between a project and a project-based learning unit.
One, remember that authenticity can be different when we think about adults versus kids. What's authentic to us in our real world as adults is often very different than what is authentic and real world to kids. When I say authenticity, I typically mean real world, yes, but real world to the kids, contextually real to the kids, interesting and engaging to the kids. So it's got to be something that's authentic to them, their context, their environment, their experiences. And I would agree with Christy. That's often the thing that we leave out because, we have our standards and we have our things we have to teach. So just remember that this piece of authenticity helps keep the kids engaged, helps drive the inquiry that happens throughout the process. But it really is one of the things that takes a process from being simply a project to being a PBL.
Okay, so whether you're doing an in-person project-based learning unit or even an NTI one, there's a typical project-based structure that we kind of follow. So there's always a project launch where you'll want to develop empathy. Who is being impacted? What is the purpose? We're going to talk about these a little bit more in depth on the following slides, but this is just an overview. Define and ideate. So you want to build that background knowledge. You want to make sure that both students and teachers are giving a chance to share their ideas. Develop the prototype, designing and drafting the project, and then conducting additional research, test and revise, making improvements as you go, and exhibition and reflection. And I actually feel like this is true when teachers are kind of doing the backside of the designing the project and also as students are moving through the project themselves.
All right,
Maddie, anything to do? All right.
Nope, I was just going to jump in on the next slide.
Okay, so we want to kind of start with the project launch. So developing empathy, who is impacted and what is the purpose. As I build community and culture at the beginning of the year, I also really focus on some skills that I think will help a project-based learning classroom. And so empathy is a huge one. So before we even jump into a project, I often do some small mini lessons over empathy. What does empathy mean? How do we build empathy? Because at an elementary level, sometimes they're not as familiar with that. They're not, they can't understand how to step into someone else's shoes. After we've kind of talked about empathy, what it means, then we can really start moving into some project-based learning units. So an NTI might look a little different, an entry event, whereas it might be something in the classroom where you bring someone in, or where you have this big dramatic set the stage. In NTI, it's going to look a little different. And so entry events could be videos. You could still bring someone in, but it would have to be obviously virtual. So it's just taking those things and tweaking them slightly. You still want your entry event to be very engaging. You want it to be a hook. You want it to bring the students in. So you would still want to consider those things virtually. You have your problem statement and intro, your knows and your needs to knows. So a lot of times when we're, we don't, as teachers, we're not going to fully design the project-based learning unit, because with the student voice and choice, it does allow for some flexibility, but you obviously have some content that you want to consider when you're doing these project-based learning units. So you definitely want to look for some cross-curricular content that might connect, so that you can really bring in, multiple subjects. But you really want to think about your knows and your need to knows. What do your students need to know once they have completed this project-based learning unit? And those are things you really want to make sure you focus on. But you would take that content, the need to knows, those things, and then you would develop your driving question. I purposely, I already had when I would do project-based learning in my classroom, I would almost always have a driving question in mind. But because I wanted the students to drive the purpose, I wanted the students to drive the learning, I set up my entry event and my beforehand things to where the students actually created the driving question. I led them there, but I was like, oh, so you guys really want to know this? And they were like, yes. And we used that as our driving question. It was very similar to the one I already had in my mind, but it hit the needs and the knows like I thought. And it also, because the students felt like they came up with it, it really engaged them and made them feel like they were empowered and driving their own learning. Rubrics and next steps. I tried my best at all times to co-create rubrics so that the students really could say like, hey, this is what we feel like is great work. And obviously, like I said, I scaffold them along the way. So in NTI, these things might be Google Meet sessions where you go over your needs and knows and you develop your driving question together. The rubric, you might have like a shared document or shared slides where you guys can kind of have in like writing what you think is great work and what you think would show your learning in this example.
Everything on this slide is really about beginning with the end in mind. So the entry event, it's about getting kids interested for the long haul and keeping them motivated. The problem statement and your guiding question, it's about rooting everything in your question. So your question is going to include the content you have to teach, the skills you have to teach, the competencies you have to teach. And that guiding question will really frame the learning from there on out. Your knows and need to knows, whether you call that a KWL chart or you do a need to know protocol, whatever process that you use for learners to come up with the questions that they have around the guiding question, what content do we need to know to answer this guiding question? What skills do we need to answer this guiding question? This, like Christy said, will frame the lessons from here on out. If your question is, how can we as scientists use what we know about measurement, data, and graphing, and this would be like an in-school example, to take information on our school's favorite vegetables so that we can tell the cafeteria staff or the nutritional staff to increase or decrease, certain things on the menu. So that was like an off-the-cuff question. I would definitely make it more succinct for kids. But then kids might say, well, we need to count. Like, we need to take data on what foods kids like the most. We need to interview kids. We'll need to know how to represent this data on a graph. We'll need to know how to write a persuasive piece so that when we present this to the cafeteria staff or the nutritional staff, that we're presenting all of our data in a persuasive way. So the kids will then frame the lessons from that need to know or KWL chart protocol. And then, like Christy said, co-design rubrics with kids early. If you don't co-design with them, present the rubric that you and your PLC have designed early so that kids know exactly what's expected and how to be successful up front. The next piece is defining and ideate. So we're talking about the kids doing the actual work here. There's research. We have mini lessons. There's opportunity for guest speakers and benchmark assessments. So what I really want to emphasize here is that this is plenty of opportunity for what we might think of as traditional instruction, because PBL, again, is just about repackaging things in a more engaging way. So if kids said, we need to learn how to represent data on a graph. Okay, well, that's a lesson, probably asynchronous, probably an exercise to practice, but kids will apply in their PBL throughout that process. So there might be times when we're back in the classroom where a lesson period feels traditional, but as long as it's rooted in the PBL, as long as we start with that guiding question to root us in what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we end with an application that relates to the PBL, then that's what really matters. And so, again, just want to emphasize that there's tons of opportunity for instruction around content and skills that we already know we have to teach. It's just within the framework of this PBL now. Christy, anything to add?
Yes, I just wanted to add that, so last year I did a project-based learning unit that ultimately some of the main content was rooted in math and volume. There was a ton of cross-curricular ELA, and I even brought in some social studies, but I had many lessons on teaching volume, but the students understood that the reason we were doing that lesson wasn't because I just wanted to arbitrarily teach them volume. They understood that we were going to apply it to our project-based learning unit. And so that if they didn't grasp volume, they wouldn't be able to complete the task that we had agreed upon was a need to know for our project. And so it kind of takes sometimes also topics that might not be completely engaging in isolation, and it takes it to another level because now they believe there's a purpose for why they're actually learning it. Okay, so develop prototypes, designing and drafting the project, and conducting additional research. So not only are you having typical, your day might look pretty typical, but you also are, like I said, kind of gauging those things towards your project. So you do have workshops and discussions. I was talking to Maddie about how sometimes there might be a day where I had to actually do a lot of presenting of information to my students, but I always made sure to follow it up with something like a Socratic seminar where they could take and they could digest that information and they could discuss it with their own voice. And so every day will look a little different. The only thing is that everything is being guided by the project. Workshops, I've taught, 1st through 5th, and I know that ELA workshop is a huge part of our day. So trying to incorporate texts that have to do with your project topic so that they can use that time also to be researching and finding new content for their project. It's not a complete overhaul of what maybe you've seen day to day. It's just really, like Maddie has said multiple times, repackaging and making sure there's a purpose and a reason behind it. And then also allowing students to make multiple drafts and to share their ideas. There was, like I said, there were times when we had discussions and there were times when, it was teacher led, but you also have to step back a lot and allow students to have student time, student to student discussion, student led conversations and things like that, which can kind of sometimes feel very hands off and kind of feel kind of chaotic. But if you've really built that purpose, when you walk around in a classroom, or I guess in virtual world, if you have multiple breakout rooms or something like that, when you check in with students, you'll realize that most of the time they're on topic because they find purpose in what they're doing.
One thing you can do to help ensure that kids have the scaffolding and support to make this kind of collaboration successful is to include a protocol. Protocols democratize different procedures and processes within classes, and they give kids language and again, procedures to lean on to ensure that whatever task they're working on, whether it's giving each other feedback or working on something collaboratively, that they have the system and structure to support them in doing that. A favorite of the deeper learning team is the critical friends tuning protocol. We've literally seen it used with kindergartners all the way up to 12th graders, with some differences in implementation. Of course, the time would be shorter with kindergarten than it would, with 12th grade. But the biggest piece with that protocol, in my opinion, is the language. Kids offering positive feedback using the sentence starter, I like. And again, if we've given kids the rubric, they can use language specifically tied to the performance descriptions that we've outlined in the rubric. They use the phrase "I wonder" to offer constructive feedback. And again, this gives kids the language to be successful, to be specific, to be academically focused, but to see themselves as resources as well.
And Cheryl and I really went in depth on some of those protocols with our descriptive feedback presentation that also you can find on the JCPS Digital Learning channel. So you could definitely check that one out if you really want to, if you have more questions about those types of protocols. And then also, I know Rebekah Reynolds earlier today really went into detail about small groups and kind of having those roles virtually, and how, you can make sure small group discussion stays focused.
Awesome plugs. All the pieces are fitting together.
They are.
Next, we'll go into the piece where we're getting feedback. There's lots of feedback cycles happening. Kids are revising. And remember, one of the big pieces of our quality work protocol, as kids are working on artifacts they might want to choose to include in their backpack, is critique and feedback. We want to make sure that all of the products that kids are working on undergo multiple rounds of critique and feedback, so that there's evidence of growth, so that kids can continue to hone in their skills and apply to their products, but that they also have opportunity to collaborate with each other and see each other as resources. So drafts of the final product, whether it's a writing piece, a video, a performance, modeling something, a slide deck, whatever, multiple drafts, multiple peer reviews. And again, if we can give the kids our rubrics early on, we can use these rubrics for the reviews and for the revisions, so that kids are extremely focused on what it is they need to do to be successful, and they can give each other feedback based on that scaffold. Making sure that we've got opportunities for kids to self-evaluate and reflect. Again, reflecting right on those rubrics is very powerful. And all of this is about giving feedback. Anything to add, Christy?
Well, and I was just going to mention that virtually, this looks slightly different, but it could be in the classroom and virtually pretty similar. Shared slide decks, Jamboard, shared documents, and all of those things allow students to be able to do these peer reviews very easily virtually. And actually, I think it's something that could lend itself very easily to the in-person classroom, but that might be something we learn in NTI that we realize, this can also be used in the classroom, and allows for a lot more peer review and peer feedback more frequently.
Very true. Finally, we've got our exhibition and reflection. One of the biggest parts of a project-based learning experience is that kids share their learning with an audience. So the audience has to be authentic. An authentic audience can be the teacher, sure, but it's even better if it's more than the teacher. If it's their small research group, if it's their parents, or if their audience is even broader than that. If we're able to report and share their work on a Google website, or on a closed private classroom YouTube channel that we can share with parents. Living in this digital world allows us to think differently about sharing our work and putting our work on digital platforms. So be creative in thinking about that. We've seen teachers create websites where kids post their work, or post their work on YouTube, or have podcasts there. But there's tons of ways for kids to share their work. It might also be something that's not so global. Like Christy mentioned, maybe they're in a small group in a Google Meet presenting to a group of their peers. But the focus here is that kids share their learning with others. That's the important part. And that we also reflect. The first time kids go through this process, they'll learn a lot. But it's not simply going through the process that will allow them to do better on the future process. It's reflecting on that process. So making sure that kids reflect on the learning, but that they also reflect on their process. What might they do differently? Would they ask for help earlier or differently? Would they spend more time on one component rather than another? Would they manage their time differently? These are all parts of the process that kids learn along the way. And we need to make sure that we reflect, so that we solidify that learning, so that when we do something like this again, the kids do even better.
Now, just one thing is I always suggest, like if you did bring in community partners in the beginning, like for the entry event or for a part of the process, that you invite them for the exhibition. So if you do have a Google Meet, inviting those community partners that the students are already familiar with to those events.
Yeah, that's great. And Christy's right. We don't want community partners to be like Tinder dates. We want them to have relationships with us. We want them to be a part of the beginning. We want them to be a part of the process and the sharing of learning. The community partners are a part of the community and should, help the kids see the value in their work. But as teachers, we're often jacks of many trades and masters of not that many. And so as often as we can bring in industry experts to provide specificity to industries or different content types that we don't have, that depth of knowledge at the same level as the industry expert, that helps kids broaden their horizons too. So as often as we can bring in community partners, I know that looks different during an NTI setting, but there's an awesome website. If you're watching, write it down. It's called nepris.com, NEPRIS.com. And it's a website where teachers can literally put out calls for different industry experts to Zoom or Google Meet or whatever with their learners. You can sift through them based on reviews. There's all kinds of industry experts here, and there's tons of pre-recorded videos as well. So lots of ways a teacher can use that site, but that's a great resource to use if you're looking for a community partner while living in our NTI life right now. We wanted to leave you with some resources and templates. So we have 2 slides here, one with examples, we'll come back to this in a second, and one with some resources and templates. So we have linked a know and need to know slide, so you can do that protocol digitally, a brainstorming sticky note template, resources on rubric design, resources on community partners, on PBL planning templates, student PBL templates where they can capture their work, our district's ARE tool. So all of these are kind of design resources for teachers as you're putting together your PBL process and plan. And then on the next slide, we have some examples. So on the right, we have some secondary examples, and on the left, we have some elementary examples. So I'm just going to take us through quickly one elementary example. And the important thing here is less about the content and more about the architecture, just so you can see what a PBL plan or scaffold could look like for a learner if they're working on this independently or in a small group. So for elementary, we want to have a brief overview, kind of like our entry event. We have our timeline. This is really important because when we're in a classroom, teachers often display this kind of thing on a bulletin board or frozen on a slide on the smart board or something, so kids can see the whole process at a glance. We don't have that capability now that we don't have that physical proximity, so including the timeline in your in this plan is really important. It also is an opportunity for you to co-develop the due dates and the pacing with kids, and kids can see when they need to check in. In this particular example, all of the benchmarks and checkpoints are in this bright coral color, so kids know when one is coming up. And there's also a place to capture this feedback all in the same place. So kids have access to that and can come back to it as they're implementing that feedback and growing. We have our guiding question here and some places for kids to launch and kind of explore that guiding question. These are all research resources where they might just get to a brief overview of some things around the question and just start to get thinking. We've got a place for them to capture content connections, do a KWL chart or a need to know protocol so they can start to draft research questions around what will fuel their exploration as they research. Some directions and scaffolds on how to gather information. And then something I think is really important, especially in elementary, is a place for them to capture their research, a place for them to capture their question, to frame their research, capture their source, support and defend how this source is credible and how they know that. Information they found, some paraphrasing so that we're not, you guys have seen it, you know what I'm talking about, doing the copy and paste, making sure kids actually know what they're reading, and then thinking about that, synthesizing. What are some new questions or new thinking about my research? How might I integrate this into my final product? A checkpoint so a teacher can check in on that research. And then kids start to work on their products. We always encourage that teachers have at least one writing product. Multiple products are great for a multitude of reasons. It's multiple opportunities to demonstrate learning. For teachers, it's several ways for us to assess learning. It speaks to different learning styles if we have product components that are, different in nature. So, but we always want to make sure that writing has a place in what we're doing. So we always encourage writing to be a part of the final product. And we always encourage multiple products. You'll see that the second product in this particular example is a field guide. And we have some exemplars so that kids know kind of what it is they're creating, but that they've got some ways to do this on their own. We have our rubric. In all honesty, this should probably be copied and put up there like around slide 2 or 3 so kids can see it early. Some pre-writing supports, more checkpoints, product pitch pieces, more checkpoints, and some places for them to link in their work. So again, lots of scaffolding and support for kids. The only other thing we wanted to just briefly show you was this planning template. This is for teachers. So if you're going to make a copy of this and use it for kids, just make sure you take out this slide. This just kind of is a menu of things you might want to think about as a teacher as you're designing this, but you'll see a lot of the same architectural components. A slide for your challenging problem or question, a slide for your timeline, slides for your checkpoints, your KWL charts. So this is kind of like the foundation that we used in developing some of these other examples, but you'll notice that a lot of the components are the same. So with that being said, we'll just end in saying that Christy and I love to co-develop and co-design with you. And so if you'd like to contact us, our contact information, again, is on this last slide. And we're happy to brainstorm with you. We're happy to plan, develop resources, or give you feedback on something that you already developed yourself. We could be community partners. We love to get in on learning experiences with kids and see their work and provide feedback. So any and all of those things we're happy to help with. Anything else, Christy, as we wrap up?
No, I think, we have about 2 minutes. So if anybody has questions or anything, or it'd probably be easiest to email us. I know my last presentation, I had like 4 people email me. I tried to get back as quick as I could.
Yeah, you all, that has been great. The chat is just full of compliments more than questions. Your teammates have been handling the chat. So it's been fantastic from my point of view. I really appreciate that last slide with the resources. That's going to be all of it was helpful, but having all that available to teachers, just can't ask for any more than that.
Well, teachers, after you process, if there's something you think of, feel free to reach out. And we always like to work with our friends in IT3 on the digital tools to make this happen. We'd love to help you design PBL experiences for your kids.
Absolutely. Right back at you, Maddie. So.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Thanks, Christy. Appreciate you all.
Bye.
Well, again, good morning still to everybody who may just be joining us. I'm Jack Bosley with the Digital Innovation Team, and I believe shortly we're going to be joined by Joe McKim and Irma, who are going to be talking about project-based learning during NTI for the middle school. But while we kind of wait around on that and I get final word one way or the other, let me take you to our the master schedule here. You can find that at jcps.me/NTI, and that is on the teacher side of the NTI website. So here we're going to take a lunch break at 12 o'clock. And after that, Dr. Lynn Reynolds will be coming on to talk about JCPS Library Online. We'll look at interdisciplinary choice boards with Suzanne Kramer and Ryan New this afternoon. We also have a big block of time reserved for remote guided reading with Jan Richardson. It's going to be a super important session. So many schools and teachers are using Jan Richardson's information. After that, it's going to be individualized instruction during NTI. And then finally, this afternoon at 3:30, the Backpack of Success Skills at Home with Alan Young and Justin Elliott. Now, if you miss any of these live sessions, that is no problem because you can always go over to all the individualized videos that are there. There are hundreds of them now. Or you can go over to the playlist and search that way if you're looking for something specific. There's a playlist, and as Maddie and I were talking about right before her session got started, there is this magnifying glass where you can actually search for specific content that you might be looking for. So JCPS Digital Learning Channel, great resource, all the on-demand PD that you could hope for. Make sure that you click on the red subscribe button so you can get alerts when new videos are posted. And there's Joe and Irma. Hi, how are you all today?
I am well. How are you?
Doing great, doing great.
Busy as ever, jumping from one digital platform from another, right?
That's exactly it. It's the new normal, Joe.
That's right.
So I'm going to turn it over to you all, and we just finished up with Maddie and Christy, and they were talking about PBL at the elementary level, and I believe you all are going to be talking about same topic except for middle school. Is that right?
Well, it's for middle and high. It should be for all secondary. So,
okay, perfect.
Yeah, and it's a lot of the same stuff, just with some different examples. And Emma, are you sharing on this one, or am I doing that?
I think you were going to share on this one, Joe.
Okie dokie.
That's all right.
I can. Let me. Once I figure out how to do it, I will do it.
Joe, while you're doing that, I'll tell you, I love that exposed brick in the background. That's beautiful.
Thank you. I wish I could say it was my house, but it's not.
Oh.
All right. Why am I not seeing the little share your screen button?
Yeah, I didn't have an option for that one either.
Yeah, I don't. Here we go. Found it. Got it. Yeah. Uh-oh, it's giving me an error.
Irma, if hers is airing out, do you think maybe you could share for us?
Yes, I'm going to try mine.
Same error message with Google.
And for those of you that don't know, Irma and I are both Moore Mustang alums, so it's always great to see her out and about. And I get to work with Joe on a regular basis at the Miracle Middle School team level. So it's, I feel like I'm, hashtag Miracle Middle Schools. So it's good to see all these familiar faces.
Yes, it's great that we've added Irma to our team because she and I are teaming up for secondary schools, but she's going to focus on high and I'm going to focus on middle. So whether you're middle or high school, you've got a lot of support now, which is fabulous.
Absolutely.
Yes. Captions.
Thank you. I think we've been using Zoom so much. This is a good experience to have another tool to use. Awesome. Thank you all so much. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We are focusing on project-based learning in NTI for middle and high school. I'm Irma Bektich. I'm one of the deeper learning resource teachers, and my email is right here on the screen, as well as my Twitter handle. You're welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions about our presentation during or after the presentation, or if there's any way that we can support you from the deeper learning team.
Yep. And again, I'm Jill McKim, also with the Deeper Learning team. We have all my contact info there. Don't hesitate to reach out with us. We're talking about project-based learning today, but if you have questions about personalized learning, single point rubrics, standards-based grading, anything that's going to help us reach a deeper level of learning with our students, the backpack of success skills, anything, we're here to help. Whatever your needs are, don't hesitate to reach out.
You may have seen this presentation for elementary earlier. We will have a lot of similar information and just different examples.
Right. So we want to start with typically we have lived in the world that is the gray line across the top, and that is we teach, or lecture, we give kids an activity, some practice, and then we give them a quiz and repeat. We keep repeating that cycle until we get to a final exam, which is usually in a calendar. It's a set date. It's not flexible. It's just, this is when it's going to happen. So whether kids are ready or not, that's what happens. And then we only do the project at the end as a culminating project if we happen to have time, or if by chance some kids do move through the material more quickly than we anticipated, we might add a project at the end. But our traditional way of teaching has been direct instruction, some practice, and then an assessment. With project-based learning, we're sort of flipping that on its head, and we're saying, let's not just have the project be something that's tagged on at the end if we have time, or if kids have mastered our content. Instead, let's launch that project at the very, very beginning with some engaging and authentic task or question. In a lot of our curriculum frameworks now, those might be called compelling questions or performance tasks. And we would launch the learning with those things and then do our teaching. We might still have direct instruction as a lecture. We're still going to have our workshop model. We're going to give kids opportunities to research and engage with getting new information, right? Do our science labs. But they're doing them with the purpose of answering that question and solving that problem and doing that project. So the learning, the content we're doing has a purpose that's real and authentic to kids. We're still going to have our benchmark assessments. They may look like performance tasks. They may look like quick, informal assessments we do in lots of ways with technology during NTI, but we're still going to have some benchmark assessments on our standards and our success skills. We're going to give kids opportunities to reflect on that learning with their content and the success skills, as well as we're going to reflect along the way on how are we doing on answering that compelling question, on designing that solution for that problem that launched our project. We're going to have reflection on that throughout the entire project. And that's going to go through cycles. It's iterative. Project-based learning is iterative until we eventually get to that culminating event, which is our summative assessment, when students demonstrate their learning of not only our academic standards, but also our competencies and success skills. So again, we're flipping learning on its head and starting with the exciting part to make it real and engaging for kids, and doing the learning as a tool to help students answer that question and get to that culminating event.
One of my kind of favorite ways of looking at this is what you're designing, something that has the project as the dessert at the end, or is the project the main course? And so that's kind of one of the things that I've kept in mind as I'm designing these project-based learning experiences and the differences between them. If I can have my project as the main course, like that makes way more sense to me in terms of that engagement aspect, because then I'm going to be engaged the whole time, as opposed to just kind of having something that I may or may not get at the end of the unit. And here we have gold standard PBL. So these are kind of our aspects that truly make our project-based learning experiences high quality and meaningful for students. So you're going to have your learning goals, which will include key knowledge, understanding, and success skills. But then that one of those pieces is that you're going to start with the challenging problem or question that's going to be engaging and authentic for students. There's going to be sustained inquiry and authenticity, student voice and choice. And in a little bit, we're going to kind of go further into what that might look like. And constantly, students are going to be engaged in reflection. So as they're going through that inquiry process, they're going to be reflecting on what they're learning and how they might adapt or change their project that they're designing to solve that challenging problem or answer that challenging question. They're going to be engaged in that critique and revision. And so that might look like you setting up a design brief or an interview with a guest speaker. It might look like them sharing their work with other students and revising it. But the idea is that they would be creating towards that public product where you would have an audience that's authentic, that's impacted by that challenging problem or question. And so all of these components can be achieved if we're really working through this process that we looked at in the previous slide and truly thinking of learning through project-based learning as opposed to just a project at the end. Joe, is there anything you wanted to add on this one?
No, I think you did a great job. Thank you.
Okay, and so this is the project-based learning structure that you could choose to follow. This was adapted from Stanford D School design thinking process. Shout out to Courtney McDonald from Atherton High School for truly taking the time to go through this with me and look at how do we take gold standard PBL and the design thinking process and kind of combine those. And so the first part of the structure is your project launch. That's where students would develop empathy. They would look at who is impacted by that driving question. What is the purpose of that project-based learning experience? They would define and ideate. So they would build that necessary background knowledge, share their ideas. Then they would develop the prototype. So that's really where they're designing and drafting the project, and they're conducting additional research that they would kind of come up with the questions for themselves. And then they're testing and revising. And so that could look a couple of different ways. You know, if you're in person, you might have someone actually come in and listen to the students present their prototype, and then they would go back to kind of the drawing board and revise as needed. In a virtual setting, you might be able to do the same thing in a Google Meet, but really that's focused on students having constant opportunities to revise their work. And finally, you would have that exhibition and reflection piece. That's where that public product comes in, where students are sharing with an authentic audience, they're receiving feedback, and they're reflecting. And so we know that if students have an opportunity to present their work and share with others, that engagement piece does increase because they know that what they're doing is meaningful. Other people are going to look at it. Besides just them or even the other students in the class, they know that their work will be relevant to someone. And so that piece is super important. And we're going to look at that in more depth in just a little bit.
Right. So we're going to go through these very quickly because we do only have about 15 minutes left, and we do want to spend a fair bit of that time looking at those secondary examples that we talked about that really sets this session apart from the one prior to it. But if we think about the project launch, again, we're going to start with that entry event. That's where we're going to get student engagement and really build that relevance, that authenticity with students. How does this project that we're going to do, or this problem that we're going to solve, connect to students in their real life and their work at home? Right now, a lot of our secondary students, whether they're middle or high, are extremely aware, if not involved, in what's going on in our community, whether that's with food deserts and food scarcity, or it's through economics. Many of our students right now at the secondary level, especially in high school, are in situations where they may be the only wage earner because their parents are unemployed due to COVID. So what kind of entry event can we launch that connects to who they are as human beings and brings that into their real life? And that's where we get our problem statement and introduction. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but you get that driving question that that we come from our problem statement. Like, so we may start with, lack of food is a problem in this part of Louisville, and the compelling question might be, how might we as students help inform our Jefferson County community on ways that they can help reduce food scarcity in parts of the city, right? So we come up with that question, and then we let students, that sustained inquiry where students are showing their own curiosity. What questions do they have? What do they already know that's connected to our content? And what do they need to know that's connected to our content and beyond to answer that question and to do this project? And lastly, we want to set up at the beginning, what are the expectations? What's the criteria for success? Show them that rubric on the front end so that they know what success looks like, and move on to letting them have some choice and voice and what the next steps look like. Where do we go from here?
So in the define and ideate stage of the structure, that's where students would be conducting research. You would have your need to know lessons. So that might look like a simple kind of knows and need to knows Jamboard, which we've actually just finished using in another PD session. That's where you would also bring in guest speakers, have your benchmarks for formative assessment, and your workshops. So one of the kind of big pieces of this part of the structure is looking at, what do your students know? What do they need to know in order to be able to work towards solving this problem or answering this driving question? And how are you going to scaffold kind of the learning in order to be able to provide them with workshops or lessons to meet their needs? So that's where a lot of our kind of personalized learning comes in as well. So for example, if you have 2 or 3 students who are really struggling with a particular aspect of their research, you might pull them out, since we're in a virtual setting, you might pull them out into a smaller breakout group and actually go through that process with them while the other learners kind of move forward. And so this part of it can truly be personalized to meet the needs of your students. Joe, is there anything you'd like to add on this one?
No, you're great. All right, again, very quickly, I love this slide because it has that turning gear image. And in personalized learning, we've been talking a lot about turning the dials on the student's path, how they access and engage information, and turning the dials on pace, how quickly or slowly do kids move through our content and the material. And so this gear lever, this gear wheel on this slide really is a great icon to represent that personalized learning aspect, again, that Irma was talking about. Some of our students are going to be able to move more quickly. Others are going to move more slowly through the information as they are learning what they need to learn, developing those solutions or those prototypes of their product, and testing it out to see if it works, right? And they're going to have some say in that. They're going to have voice and choice. They're going to help us decide what they need to do. Some students are going to say, I can go research this on my own. I know how to do that, and I can. Others are going to need discussions with their teacher to bounce ideas off of and get ideas on where to go to get information. So again, this is a real opportunity for us to personalize for students. And during NTI, we have a lot of opportunities with technology to look at how to best reach every student during this phase where they're accessing and engaging information, and creating their own designs, solutions, and prototypes.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. And next we have kind of that test and revise piece. So that's where students are having kind of multiple drafts. They're going through a peer revision process. They're getting to see presentations from peers, which might also inform their own work. They're self-evaluating and considering that feedback that they're getting in order to make those revisions. And so this part is critical because we want students to be able to show those prototypes to others and share their work and revise it before we get to that fifth part of our PBL structure here. Joe, is there anything you'd like to add on this one?
Nope, you're great. So the fifth part is that exhibition and reflection. This is where they're going to share their final product probably in a presentation, although it might be a video or some other technologically designed, crafted product. But they're going to share it with an authentic audience. Who needs to see this information? In my food scarcity example, they want people in the community. They want consumers. They want people who own or manage food stores. They may want humanitarians and philanthropists to see it. Who is that audience and how do we get them in front of that audience? It gives them an opportunity to showcase what they've learned in our content and how they're applying that content knowledge to that real world scenario, right? And then ultimately we want them reflecting on that project and that product and that presentation to that audience so that when they do their next project-based learning experience, they can get even better with the process and in how they learn through the process. There's lots of ways to do digital exhibitions right now, whether it's a digital gallery walk or an online exhibition with breakout rooms. If that's something you're thinking about, please reach out to anyone on the Deeper Learning team and we'd be happy to help you with that. And we've got about 8 minutes, Irma, just a time check, and we want to get to some of those examples.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the examples, and then we can come back and look at some of these resources and templates that we've embedded into our slides for you, so you can access those and look through those at any time. Here are some of the examples that we can take a look at, and you can feel free to peek in and look at some of the elementary examples as well, because those can kind of help inform us as to how do we build on those types of experiences that are going on in elementary classrooms.
Yeah, and I just want to point out while you're pointing to the left side of the screen there, which has our elementary examples, the bottom left PBL template is not just for elementary. That's for all grade levels. It is a guide to help a teacher create a student-facing project-based learning template to use during virtual learning and NTI. So that's for all grade levels, K through 12, not just for elementary, even though it happens to be on that side of this slide deck.
Yes, thank you, Joe. That template, I have to say, looks amazing. I wish I had that when I was doing NTI 1.0. And just in looking through it, I'm like, whoa, that's one that can kind of be easily adapted to meet your own needs in any way that you need to. So that's awesome. Let's dig into the movies are lit example. I'm going to click into it.
All right. So in this example, I'm just going to go through a couple of things. On slide 2, if you'll jump to that, Irma. On slide 2, we have a timeline. This would be a timeline where students, again, giving them some of that choice and voice and autonomy, they would create their own timeline. We could put it in as a teacher if we wanted to, but it's better if we can do that along with students. But in a virtual setting like NTI, we may want to chunk this and say, we're only going to do the first 2 things, which is the timeline draft and the video launch in week 1. And so that would be a timeline check. And then in week 2, we may do our need to know and start in on some research. So we might break that down into smaller chunks during NTI, or we may look at the whole thing depending on who your students are and what you know about them. I would skip all the way down now, Irma, to slide 8. We've also given you in here in Movies Are Lit an opportunity for students to start collecting their research. because that's a key component of this was designed for middle school. They have to generate their own research questions, find the information. We're starting to get them into that frame of citing their sources and identifying their building bibliographies and things like that. We've got to talk about source credibility, where they found the information and how they're going to use it, like in their own words. And then whether and what new thinking or new question did it arise? Again, generating their own questions and whether or not this even is something they can use. Is it applicable to the project that they've started? And then scroll on down because I'm jumping through a lot really fast. Jump into slide 14, please.
I love this one.
On one component of every PBL is that at some point, well, it doesn't have to be, I suppose, but we recommend that at every moment that kids get opportunities to write. And so in this example, they have two components. That is their product. The first product is writing an argument, and that could be a pitch or on their presentation, or it could be a full-on essay where they're writing an argument with claims, evidence, and reasoning and getting into those literary standards, right? And composition standards. But we've also shown you some hierarchy here. How will you argue for your answer to the guiding question? What is your answer and how is it an appropriate one? Then how will you apply your learning in the next component, which is your actual product? So it could be, here's my argument for my answer. Here's also my argument for why I should be doing this product that I'm going to pitch next. And then lastly, how do I know that what I'm doing is quality work and that I'm using the appropriate amount of sources? So it can be all of these things in that written piece. And then if you skip down to slide 18, I think it is. Yeah, 18. This is where they've actually created that product. And that product could be anything that they wanted to answer that question and complete that project. What some students have done is things like the category, the PBL is movies are lit. How do music and songs create themes that we see in movies, right? That's one of the components and one of the resources early on. So it might be that they create a soundtrack for their life and talk about how each of those songs represents some theme that is the narrative of their life, right? Their memoir or something like that. But whatever that big product, that big component is, they're going to link that in here in part 2. So in part 1, they may be describing why their product is the right product for this project. All right, so I went through that really quickly, and we only have like 2 minutes, Irma, and I was really hoping you get to talk about shoes.
Okay, so shoes, I'm going to go through it in about kind of 30 seconds maybe, just to give you another kind of outline of what this might look like if you're on the teacher end and planning. So you might plan out kind of what's it going to be called, who is it for, but then you could look at your entry event. How are you going to introduce it? And so in this example, there might be a YouTube video. You might pull in an outside speaker. You could present the problem statement to students. So this is the example of one where students would be looking at kind of the struggle of affording new shoes and the fact that so many shoes get thrown away so often, and how does that impact the environment? And then you would have that kind of driving question that students would look at, and it could be simple, it could be more complex, like this one is. But then you would also consider your end products. So in this example, it's very much kind of broken up where you have an individual aspect and a team aspect. But you also have that part that's very much open-ended and has some room for student choice and voice, where students are working with their teams to actually come up with solutions. So that's one example that you could look at that already has some ideas in there for standards and even some community partners that you could potentially consider reaching out to, as well as some data that you could look at kind of as a starting point. So that's one example. You're welcome to contact me if you have questions about that one. We do have some other ones It does look like we are right at 12 o'clock, so we want to respect your time. But I would highly encourage everybody to go back and look through these resources and templates, because we've kind of embedded in pieces that could be helpful for you in NTI, like this virtual exhibition presentation template for each part of that PBL structure.
Yeah, the question we get asked most is for examples. So please check out those examples. There's an example like the ELA one, Movies Are Lit, the SHU one, which is around math. The second, Making Space for Change, is geared towards science. And then the other is a history example. So there's lots of examples there for you. We're here for you. Irma, if you want to go back to our contact info to end on that, and we will stop because we are 1 minute past our time, and Kyle or whoever is out there in IT land is probably telling us to stop.
No, you guys are great. That was excellent. Lots and lots of compliments in the chat for that presentation. People really liked those last two examples of shoes and the Movies Are Lit. So great job, and thank you all for presenting.
Thank you.
Okay, I am figuring out how to get out of the...
No worries, Irma.
Oh, here it is. Sorry, I have a million windows up from jumping around from presentation to presentation.
No problem. Well, for all of you all who are joining us live, we are going to take a short break, a 30-minute break for lunch right now. Just remember, if you need support or have any questions, there are lots of people like myself and the presenters that have gone this morning who are here to help you. Just reach out to any of us. You can find that the master schedule on jcps.me/NTI to find their presentations and contact information. We try to get those linked as soon as we can, and also add it to the JCPS Digital Learning channel. So everyone, have a great lunch. Lots of excellent sessions this afternoon. We will see you back here live at 12:30.